Hey there, and welcome to episode number 63 of Killer POV. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rob G. from FEARnet and Icons of Fright. With me, as always, Rebekah McKendry, Fangoria.
Hello.
What's up?
Did you hear the disdain in his voice about Fangoria?
I know.
Fangoria. Guess who won't be writing for them again?
Hey, I just submitted something.
He just submitted stuff today.
Guess what just got rejected with your voice?
Guess who hasn't written anything for Gorezone yet? There's somebody at this table.
I keep prodding you to get the damn article in.
That would be Elric Kane.
By the time the show posts, I'm going to send it.
Feature contributor to Gorezone magazine.
Eventually.
He did write one article for, we did our Haunted House edition a couple of years ago, but I had to prod the hell out of you to get that thing in on time. So
what's with you?
Why
are you so
I like good
picky with
deadlines.
your...
I like hard deadlines. Like when people go, yeah, next week, then it never happens.
Right.
I gave you hard deadlines.
You weren't hard enough. I like it when Bekah's even harder.
Hey now.
My gosh.
Oh my God.
This is crazy.
I need a hard Bekah.
The shoes are already off.
I've got no shoes. I'm going Hobbit style. For
I
sure.
have a cold. So.
God.
Yeah, it's weird. We're recovering after our post non-horror episode, which actually most people liked.
Yeah, I got a lot of good
Except there was that one
feedback
comment.
Not everybody.
We got a comment. I didn't read the comment.
It was just I waited all week and didn't get a horror. Fair enough. We are a horror show, but
we weren't going to do one anyway. So you got something.
Yeah, it actually generated some people doing top 10 lists.
I loved that.
That was cool. I wish mine probably now, if you ask me, I couldn't even remember probably what
I would completely change my 10.
It would be a different 10.
No, for sure, because I was seeing other people's lists. I was like, oh man, I forgot about that.
I remember mine.
Oh, really? Well, yours is controversial.
Break!
Yeah, exactly. Very Drop Dead Gorgeous is a very controversial inclusion.
BJ agreed with me.
Somebody
rocks.
wanted me to remind you that there's this thing, it's called the Criterion Collection. And within those titles, there's some pretty good films that you might want to look at.
I think This Is Spinal Tap is part of Criterion Collection.
They did a DVD,
so
I think. A DVD edition.
But that's like a renegade entry by them. They're like, we're going to include this good comedy.
They did RoboCop as well.
Yeah, but that's because it's the best film of the 1980s.
It's not that I don't watch the Criterion movies. I mean, Dave makes me sit through all of them. But just at the end of the day, I tend to, if I'm not watching horror, my heart's going to go with like crazy action films and kind of screwball comedies.
You know what it is for me?
Okay, you slack for having a job.
Yeah.
Unlike the rest of us.
Honestly, believe it or not, for me, it's running time. I'm sitting in front of my collection. It's later than usual. Yeah. And I'll pull my Criterion stuff out and I'll be like, 143 minutes. Fuck, no.
It is true. I think the older you get, definitely you're going, look, running time becomes such a factor.
88 is the golden number. Yeah. If it's under 90 minutes, you're like, yes, I'm watching this.
Plus, the big question for me now has become, can I do it while doing something else? So like it happens with a lot of international titles. I mean, I watch the international titles for Fango as part of my job during the day. But at night, if I'm doing this and doing this and doing dishes at the same time and trying to coordinate this, I can't do subtitles. So I don't get to see non-horror foreign films, even if they're like old and I'm like, oh my gosh, I really want to go watch Cinema Paradisimo again. If it's got subtitles, I just can't do it because I've got too much juggling at the same time.
Right.
So kind of sucks, but it is the way of my life.
My heart is bleeding for you.
I know. Wait, I'm sure you get it, though.
I do. But you're being paid to do all those things, so it's good.
Yeah.
Good things.
I don't have kids or responsibilities, so I gladly get to just, watch things at my own pace. Yeah. Sorry, guys. So before we kick into what we have seen all week, I just wanted to make mention, since last episode, back in episode 60, we had Ryan Spindell and Ben Heathcote who were in here to do our horror anthology episode.
Really popular episode, by the way. I got a lot of feedback on that one.
A lot of people did that. I think, we maybe missed a few titles, but I think we covered almost everything. We almost got everything in that.
I think the most controversial thing was us trying to claim any film as perfect. Even I heard Tales from the Dark Side. Are you insane? So
I went
said
home,
that. I'll fight them.
Yeah, and as soon as I got home, I made eye contact with Tobe Hooper's Night Terrors, which I have not seen in a really long time, and I don't think it ever actually made it to DVD. But I have to go back and watch it at some point because it is an anthology film.
I want to see that Lovecraft one, Necronomicon. That's the one I need to see.
I have that. You need to watch it.
Good.
We should do a screening of it at some point.
Well, use no, yeah.
Yeah. So those guys came on a couple episodes ago. You should definitely check it out. But in the last week, they're doing a Kickstarter campaign for a horror anthology that they would like to make. But one of the cool things they did was make this 12-minute documentary about the, kind of people's nostalgia about the horror anthology. And thankfully, they changed the title on our episode.
That's right.
And it's now called We Come in Pieces.
Instead of Fright Bites, which was a bummer.
It is, I guess. No, I like We Come in
No,
Pieces.
it's good.
It's a great title.
All of us took part in it. So all of us have posted
we're in it, and Joe Dante's in it, and then we're in it, and then Joe Dante's in it, and then we're in it, and then Joe Dante's in it.
Joe Dante, Michael Dougherty,
and then
Dan
Joe Dante.
Scott. Yeah, a lot of good people.
It's actually a really slick, nice little piece. I like it.
So they did that. So go definitely check that out. And as of this airing, I think they got a week left on their campaign.
$10,000 to go.
As of now, yeah.
As of now, by the time you hear them, maybe a little less, I hope.
Yeah.
And they're going to screen it. We're going to screen that 10-minute promo trailer before Death Spa, if you're in LA.
On Saturday.
Saturday night, Fangoria was presenting with Gorgon Video, and we're going to screen that. And, Death Spa perfectly ties into today's show, even though I haven't seen it. But we're going to play that beforehand, even though they're not really related. I think it's a fun way to kind of cross-promote things, 80s, love. Cinema.
Yeah.
So it should
cool.
be fun. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, check that out. Okay, so Bekah was, what did you see at Phoenix? Because you just got back from the Phoenix Comic-Con.
I did. Well, I didn't see any films at Phoenix. I spent the whole time at the Fango booth, and then I was running around doing panels and everything. But it was absolutely amazing. I was not expecting the con to be quite as big as it was. I think they said 150,000 attendees.
It looked huge, actually. Way bigger than I imagined.
And it's weird because Fango decided not to do San Diego Comic-Con this year because it has just gotten ridiculously expensive, and I have to get the staff there and house them. And the San Diego hotels kind of price gouge during San Diego Comic-Con and will charge you like $600 for a room each night. It's insane.
Is that the first time in how long?
It's the first time in 7 years we have not done it. And so this year instead, I said, you know what? If we're not going to do San Diego Comic-Con, I'm going to pick like 4 or 5 smaller cons and do those. And that's how we ended up at a lot of the cons that we've been doing lately. But I picked San Diego Comic-Con Phoenix Comic-Con just because the price was really reasonable on it. And I was kind of excited, and we'd never done it before. I was expecting a much smaller con. And so when we arrive and I start loading in, and we're in this vast convention hall the size of San Diego, I was like, wow. And I kept thinking, like, there's no way they can fill this with people. And by Saturday, it was just like San Diego, where it was like wall-to-wall people.
Were there premieres? And so what's the draw of this con?
I think that it's kind of one of the only things going on in Phoenix. It was huge. And I can't say that there were premieres or anything like that. They had a lot of cool guests, and they had a lot of cool panels. Like, I got to be on a couple of panels I was super psyched about. But yeah, it was just a generally good time, and the fans were very enthusiastic about the subject matter, and the whole convention kind of took over was part of downtown San Diego. Like, everything became incorporated into it, not unlike San Diego Comic-Con, where it was much more than just to show up and do your thing. It was like a full day inclusive experience going all over the place. And there were events going on around the clock. And the coolest thing, I have to say, this one was kind of shocking. There was one main hotel that everyone was staying at. It was right across the street, and it's where we were staying too. And after the con ended at 7:00 each night, they rented games out, and they had it was like a massive convention area inside the hotel was just for game playing. And so we went over there, and we ended up playing a couple rounds of Cards Against Humanity with people I've never met before. But it was the most fun I had at the con, just because it was literally just thousands of people in a room just going table to table playing different games. It was amazing. I've never seen anything like it before.
But it's not as horror-centric, you said? It's more comic books?
It's much more comic book-centric. Actually, Dave and I were playing a game at the booth, realizing how old we are, where we were trying to name the costumes as they walked past. The majority of them were anime. At least those were the ones that stumped us, where I was like, I don't know, he's got like pink spiky hair and is carrying some type of Asian looking blade, and you could tell it was an anime costume, but I had no idea what any of these costumes were. We did see a couple of really cool horror costumes that I got psyched about. We saw a Dexter, and he had a horde of female victims with him, which were just girls wrapped in plastic with the knife coming out of their chest.
Way to go.
It was awesome.
Wow.
Right up someone's alley?
Yeah, we saw a baby Ash, which I just thought was adorable. He was probably about 2 years old, riding around as Ash. And but that was the other thing, is everybody was dressed up. I've never seen that many people come in costume, but it was truly like a celebrational thing. So,
wow, that's cool. All right,
very cool. Highly recommend you guys check it out next year.
What did everyone see?
Oh my God, guys! I saw R.I.P.D. Actually, let me back that up.
I'm sorry.
I'll back this up.
Ryan Reynolds
I watched
movie?
17 minutes of R.I.P.D.
Why are you
came
gonna
on
waste,
TV.
Why are you going to waste my 2 minutes talking about this?
Well, because it's horror.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's about horror. You know, it's unlike Men in Black, which is like very much about like aliens. This one is about horror creatures and the afterlife. But dude, like I don't turn off a lot of movies, but this one came on TV, and basically within about 4 minutes, I think, Ryan Reynolds is falling to his like imminent doom or whatever, and then it turns into the afterlife. It might be the worst CGI I've seen in my whole life, and it was enough that I think any human being in that moment could not stick with a movie like that. And I watched another few minutes just going, I wonder what this is, thinking maybe I'll review this on the show. And so I'm not going to review it for good or bad because I can't say I've seen it. But I can tell you that what I saw makes me just such a firm believer in like, also they're the two characters, you know, Jeff Bridges is one of the best actors of our generation. It's just, they both felt like, especially he felt like he was playing a cliche version of the things he's done well lately. It felt like that true grit character done badly. You know, it's a shame. Anyway, so it was, you know, big budget. You know, it looked like it was trying to be Men in Black and Dylan Dog, you know, total zero. Two other things quickly. I've seen Iguana before, but I was rewatching it. I'm meant to be interviewing the director, Monty Hellman, for the Blu-ray release, thanks to Chris Alexander, who's hooked up. I'm hopeful that it will make it on. Since having the responsibility of trying to wrangle an interview out of an 80-year-old famous director, it's a lot harder than you think, because so far I've had like 3 dates canceled. And we have Saturday's our last time. If we don't get it, it's not going to be on the Blu-ray. So,
don't you see him all the time?
Yeah, but not with a crew, not with cameras. He's very.
Don't you mean
very,
like one? Aren't you just going to go with
No, he will not do the interview unless it's a 2-person on-camera interview. He will not do it. He doesn't want to be in camera. So I have to be part of the interview because he wants to have a dialogue about something. Otherwise, he won't do it. So it's a lot. I would do it on my phone if it was up to me. And they had said, well, get him to do a quick intro. And I almost laughed. And I didn't even have to write to Monty. And I go, I know what you're going to say when I write an intro. And he goes, I don't intro a film. What are you, crazy? That's a bunch of bullshit. So anyway, I hope that it'll be on. But Iguana, it's, you know, I'd seen it once before. It's a really interesting film. It's kind of almost like a lost Herzog film, very dark, like you know, about as dark as you can make a film. You know, maybe not straight horror, art house, but the guy is basically the guy from Everett McGill from People Under Stairs and Twin Peaks.
Wow.
Half his face is iguana skinned, almost like rough, so he's almost like a freak of nature, and he's a pirate on a ship, and he basically he gets off this thing because he's being kind of abused by the rest of the people on it, and basically tries to become king of his own island. As a young Michael Madsen, he enslaves and keeps all these people as slaves, takes this woman and abuses her, and it's a pretty crazy movie, but it's going to be coming out Raro Video. Fingers crossed. If we get this interview, it's going to be cool. I've been, you know, prepping for it. It'll be fun. It's an interesting movie. I think a lot of people will find it, you know, it's one of those discovery type movies.
Right.
Then I've got a film that I haven't been this excited since Under the Skin. It's probably my second favorite film. I will not tell you how I saw it. I did not steal it from Rebecca's shelf while she was away.
Yes, you did.
And it was in plastic and wasn't even meant to be seen. But let's just say I watched it on VOD. It's Enemy by Denis Villeneuve. I can't say his name.
You did take that off my shelf.
Last year, one of my favorite films was Prisoners. And I'd heard about this film. I knew it was a doppelganger film with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Okay.
I knew nothing else about it. 2 people who I really trust. One I used to know at school, Ben Collins, and then there was that Ben Grabinski, both guys online. You know, both. When I tweeted something about Under the Skin, they go, "Have you seen Enemy? It's the most." And so I was like, "Okay, well, I'll check it out." Anyway, it was on her shelf when she was out of town. It hadn't been opened, probably for a review copy, probably completely illegal. That I'm watching it.
Actually, yeah, that is a review copy. I didn't watch it yet.
So I watched it on VOD. I watched it on VOD.
Sure you did. Okay.
And paid money. Anyway, this film is like. You'll probably hate it. You probably hate it. I fucking love this movie. I would say top 2 of the year so far with Under the Skin.
Oh my God.
It is. It's been adapted by this really famous author Jose Saramago, but so loosely. Under the Skin and this are great examples of adapting books because they take just the tiniest bit.
Did you say it's a Jose Saramago novel?
Yeah, the double.
I love him.
I've read all his books. He's a great.
Blindness.
Blindness is one of the best books I've ever read.
I love.
Yeah, The Blindness is a perfect book. Terrible movie.
Yeah, I didn't like the movie either.
But this is an example. Like they literally just take this tiny, thin part of the story and then they adapt it, and it is so open. I've read about 30 different interpretations of what this film means now because it's purposely. I watched the making of it. It's purposely like I'm not going to tell you these. It's very surreal, but it's the first time in a long time I've been scared by the last moment of the movie. I literally was like, I don't know how I feel about this. It's actually kind of scary and unnerving. And it's a very hypnotic film. He instantly goes into to me, like one of the best directors. I mean, Prisoners was so tough that to follow with this really like artistic, strange little movie, and Gyllenhaal, like he's doing the best work he's done with this director.
Wow. Okay.
It's got a little bit of Lost Highway, if you've seen that, if you're looking for it. This is not for everyone. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I only want an 80s fun movie, do not, you will be bored. But if you listen to some of the things I often get excited about, I would say, honestly, it might be, for those who like kind of Kafka ideas or have ever read Kafka, it might be the closest I've ever seen to getting at what that actually means. It could be a film about a guy in a bad relationship imagining weird things happening, or it could be just about a guy in a totalitarian state where basically spiders are above us, running us, and you have no idea by the time it ends. You'll have an opinion. It's a really, really cool film, and it's going to be one you're going to have to seek out, because I think it has already done a very limited theatrical. Some VOD is over now, and so the Blu-ray must be about to come out. But I'm going to just add this, Slate.com. As soon as you finish watching this movie, go straight, if you're scratching your head or kind of not sure exactly what go to Slate.com, because they've got probably the most interesting explanation of what the film could have been. I think it's it's the closest to a horror Twilight Zone meaning.
What is the name of the book that it came from?
It's for The Double.
The Double.
It was one of I've actually read that one, and it wasn't one of my favorites of his, but the Double part is taken, and some of the stuff about the state is there, not so much the relationship stuff, which is really cool. I mean, it's just a very, basically, the only one line I'll give you is, it's basically Jake Gyllenhaal is this kind of, he seems a little kind of not the happiest guy teaching history at a university, and he's kind of got a girlfriend he sees now and then one day somebody says, hey, do you like movies? He's like, not really. And they're like, oh, you should check out this one movie. And he checks it out, and he basically, as one of the extras in it, is his doppelganger. And he's like, huh. And he freezes the frame. He's like, that's weird, and starts basically trying to find out who this actor is. And it basically leads him to an exact replica of himself in the world, and trying to find out, even though their personalities are totally different, and their two situations start to come together. And it's really like, I like doppelganger.
Spider overlords.
The spider thing is in it as this abstract motif, and that's where you have to kind of make up your own decision, because some people take it as a straight horror people, and some people go, oh, it means something.
Right. So
beyond that, but really I can't rave about enough, for me personally, that I just like flat out loved this film.
Can I have my copy back so I can watch
it's at your house. I actually I returned it so you wouldn't even notice. But wait. I watched it on VOD.
Did you take my copy of Repulsion too?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
But
you have that.
Actually, I thought about texting you saying I have one of your films, but if you can't work out which one it is, you never get to it again. You'd have to be really in charge.
That's funny.
So anyway, that's what I was doing.
I really quickly, I didn't really see much this week, but I did finally catch Jodorowsky's Dune. It was playing on a double bill with Alien at New Beverly, which is kind of a nice little pairing.
I was talking to one of the producers today at Jump Hit.
Were you really?
He came in, he's like a really nice guy.
I thought they should have played it the opposite way, because
Which was it?
Which order? They played Alien first and then Jodorowsky's Dune, right. But I felt like it would have been better.
Yeah, it might have informed some of the design elements you might have looked for.
Sure.
Yeah.
But no, Elric mentioned it on the show a couple of weeks ago. It's a thoroughly entertaining, crazy kind of documentary, because Jodorowsky's nuts.
Yeah, but he's inspiring.
He's very inspiring. Yeah, by the end of the movie, I was very, very inspired, and I just felt very creative. But it might be a one-shot deal for me. I mean, maybe I could watch it again and still get.
Yeah, I don't think it's maybe a rework.
But it's a great one-shot deal, and quite frankly, seeing it with an audience was amazing, because again, Jodorowsky says some of the most wildest, like. Some of it's shocking, but he says some of the wildest shit, and being able to see it with an audience who all would laugh out loud.
Right.
And I mean, the stories, just the timing of everything, because this is like the early 70s, and like every name he kept bringing up, like the people that he wanted in the movie, like
was he there?
No. I'm talking about him in the doc itself.
Oh, okay.
Like that, because it's extensively mostly interviews with him and a lot of the people involved and stuff. But like the coincidental nature of like, I want Mick Jagger in the movie, and then like Mick Jagger, he bumps into him or whatever, and then Salvador Dali, and like all these like if this going after Pink Floyd, the Pink Floyd story is hilarious. I mean,
I love that. There's a story about Dali wanting to be the highest paid actor in the history of
Amazing.
and they find a way to trick him into like, yeah, you will get paid $100,000 per minute.
Yeah.
And then they're behind the back going, and he's going to be in it for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
We'll cut his role down to 2 minutes.
I mean, and I totally believe all the Dali stuff. Essentially, Dali met him in like all these different countries for meetings. Like it would be like, he's like, all right, I'll meet you in Paris. And then they meet at a restaurant and he's like, we could have another meeting in Barcelona or something. And you'd have to like go all over the place.
Like a genius.
Just to get him in the
and
movie
Jodorowsky is
minutes.
the ultimate surrealist. I mean, he's like the only one for film, I think, who really nailed surrealism. So it's kind of amazing.
Yeah,
it's an incredible story.
It's an incredible story, and I also didn't realize how far ahead of the game he was. I mean, it really points out how influential that movie would have been had it gotten made in terms of science fiction at that period. So strongly recommended. I think, is it on VOD now? I think
I think it was. I think it definitely was at one point.
And I will be watching it.
Yeah, you might be able to see it on VOD, and if not, I know the Blu-ray's coming out within the month. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention, not something that I saw, but read, Scott Reynolds, shout out to him. He lent me the graphic novels or the comics for Locke Key, which is a series written by Joe Hill, son of Stephen King.
A graphic novel, you said?
Yeah, I mean, it was a comic book series, but, you know, the graphic novels, they collect, 6 or 7 issues per story arc. And they did 6 full books. So the story's completely done. It's, so it was, to me, it's like revisiting a TV show in terms of, reading a comic series when there's an end, for a definitive end to it. But I mean, really, if you're into horror stuff, I've read, I started reading Heart-Shaped Box. That's the only novel of Joe Hill's that I've read. And he's a fantastic novelist, not exactly like his father, but very much in his vein. However, he is equally a great writer in the medium of comics. It's not like a novelist trying to make a comic. He completely understands comic books and the whole story behind it. It's this family whose father gets killed in this weird way, and they have to kind of move back to his childhood like mansion home. And there's a series of like doors and keys that when you use them a certain way, it's really hard to explain. It's really fantastical.
How many books is it? If I want to read?
It's 6. So it's totally readable. It's the entire series is 6. And the only side note, I don't know if I ever talked about it, but at one point there was a pilot floating around for that was directed by Mark Romanek. And I think it was for Fox, and they rejected it. Because I worked at FEARnet, which is no longer there, so I could say this now. We, of course, always occasionally would come across pilots as options for shows we might pick up. So I was able to see the pilot of this. And it's very interesting. The show would have worked. What's weird to me is that the pilot episode, which is about 45, 50 minutes, is the entire first book.
Oh, wow.
So I was kind of amazed that they were able to cram that much into just one. I have to imagine that had it continued, they would have done maybe some flashbacks and fleshed out what you saw. But it would have been a really hard show to pull off.
That's how, if you go back, I don't know if you ever watched the first episode of American Horror Story, the first pilot of that is amongst the worst things I've ever seen in TV. And yet I went on to love the show. It just felt like a whole season of a show in an hour and a half. And I remember going, what is with this editing? Like, just kept throwing shit at you.
Constant.
Yeah, and it really took a while for the show to slow down and find its pacing. And then it hit its stride.
I don't know if it did slow down as much as we just got used to the style.
Maybe. That first one was just insane.
If you think about it, there's always at least 6 storylines going on simultaneously. So.
Yeah, but that's interesting. Okay,
so my stride, if you're looking for something unique and interesting and kind of fantastical, but with genre elements, I strongly recommend Locke Key. And again, it's less intimidating. It's like, again, discovering a show when it's completely done with, because now you can just read them all or whatever. All right, so Bekah, did you see anything?
Yeah, actually, I saw Oculus.
Oh, that's right.
Which I had seen it a couple of weeks ago, but we didn't get a chance to talk about it before I left for Phoenix. So I'll do this one quick. I think that a lot of people were put off by it because they saw it theatrically. And Oculus, it's a small movie. It's a very small movie. It's literally like 4 people in a house for the entire film. And most of it takes place in one room. Honestly, if someone had handed it to me as an indie film, it would be my favorite movie of the year. But because I think a lot of people, paid like $15 to go see it theatrically, and it was such a kind of small, self-contained movie, I don't think it sat well with them.
That's good, though. That means that when I watch it, I'll probably, might be able to divorce myself from that.
Yeah, I didn't watch it in a theater. I watched it just, on my television at my home. And it was wonderful. There were some of the creepiest moments I've seen in a long time in there. But I think if I had been a fan and gone and paid $15 for it, when I see something in the theater, I expect studio gloss. I expect kind of, a bigger scale. And this is very small. I mean, you can think, Do
you think that's why it's been polarizing? It seems like that wouldn't be enough. I mean, that seems like a good reason for the general population.
Say, because people are willing to pay for Paranormal Activity movies. And I don't know, I haven't watched any of the sequels, but it's like the first movie definitely doesn't seem like something I should pay $15.
But it's kind of a gimmick. I mean, Paranormal Activity has a gimmick to it. This is kind of a straightforward horror story, but very small. In a very small self-contained area. And it's got a lot of cool elements to it. But yeah, I mean, just talking to fans at Phoenix this weekend too about it, because a lot of them came up and, I just saw this, and this, and talk horror for the whole time. And a lot of the folks I talked to felt the same way, where they were like, I saw it at the local Cineplex and I can't believe I paid $20 for that. And I think that was part of it.
Smaller than something like Insidious?
It's much smaller than Insidious, actually.
Because, I mean, Insidious is a small movie, but then again, you've got something like James Wan and movie stars.
This
has a couple of movie stars in it, but still, it's a very, very small self-contained film. So, but
it raises that question. We were kind of talking on Twitter about it, and I'd be curious what people think. This idea that maybe we need to get to there needs to be some change in movie theater pricing. Because, that Jodorowsky documentary you saw, if that was $5, a lot more people might see that in a theater. Yeah. If that's $15, almost no one's going to go with theater. And I'm saying especially compared to VOD. Yeah. If I can watch for $8 and I can bring my friends to my house.
Yeah.
And so I think that with documentaries and indie films, they need to figure out, and it probably would come down to like a specific chain of theaters, like a Sundance or a Landmark, saying, look, these films are made for a lot less money, so we can charge less money for these movies and find some price point that would just be different. Because I would pay $20 to go see, whether not necessarily Captain America, but something that I know costs $200 million. But I will not, I just can't bring myself now to spend that on movies I'm probably going to like more. But they're a lot smaller, and they don't really need that.
Well,
it's actually an unrealistic
that much
thing.
On Oculus, but I think most of it went into like a P&A budget.
Well, I think Oculus was a $3 million movie, maybe.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? I think it's a big thing that I think it could be the death of cinema. Like, I think this idea of, and I mean when you go to the cinema, I think that's what it is hanging in the balance right now, is this idea of price point and what people comparing yourself to VOD and streaming. How are you going to go, okay, I've got a new product, how do I get somebody to come to it? I think they just have to be places that are really cheap.
And I have a lot of questions to talk about with VOD tonight, and the idea of direct to video versus VOD in the market that we see now.
I mean, it's like the modern day version of it, but it's totally different.
Completely different, because there's no transparency in the numbers, so nobody knows how anything does unless they schedule a sequel.
And it's not quality based. I think tip of the hat, we will be talking straight to video and SOVs and all that tonight, but unlike that stuff, often that was about quality. Your film's not good enough to go to a theater, so you went straight to video. Nowadays, that has nothing to do with it. Often they'll go VOD first. It's a very strange.
Yeah, and even direct to video changed towards the end, like the beginning of the DVD cycle, where all of a sudden it wasn't a bad, big deal to do what would be considered low budget for theatrical, but a big enough budget, like 30 Days of Night sequels or, stuff like that, where it's like, oh, it's not a dirty word.
IMDb ranks you differently if you don't do at least a certain number of requisite theaters. So you have to four-wall theaters where you're pretty much buying your way into the theaters.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
But anyway, we'll get into all that. But I predict Oculus will do well on VOD because, again, I bet
you're right.
I think that it was, it's a great movie. I think it'll do better in your living room.
All right. And that's how I'm going to watch it.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to see that. Okay.
All right, so let's take a break and we'll grab our guest. Okay, welcome back. And we are here with our guest for our topic today, which is direct-to-video horror. And our guest from Bleeding Skull is Dan Budnik.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good to be here.
And special thanks to Scott Reynolds, who was the one that suggested Dan for the show and said, you guys will have a lot of fun talking about these movies. And, so Dan's from Bleeding Skull, which I don't know, maybe you could tell us exactly what Bleeding Skull is.
Well, Bleeding Skull, we're a movie review site. We review a lot of very obscure movies, mostly horror, some sci-fi. We've been doing a lot of action films lately because there are a lot of wonderful, strange action films. But it started back in 2004. Joseph A. Ziemba, the man who runs the site, He just started it one day. He had a collection of VHS tapes that he wanted to review, and so he started the site.
Was the goal specifically VHS horror, or movies that are a little bit harder to come by than, say, the traditional Halloween review that everyone's done?
Here and there, that's been the now the focus now is very much like that. At times we've reviewed things that most folks would know, but generally we try to focus on things that most people would have no idea.
Yeah,
like Disconnected, which
everyone at this table knows.
Everyone at this table, because we screened it at Jump Cut on 16 millimeter, and it was fantastic.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was a mind-blowing experience. But yeah, no, I mean, it's
how did you get involved? Because if it was his site, how did you?
I emailed Joe. I was actually at a temp job where I was the receptionist who was actually sitting. For some reason, all the phones were set up in the copy room, so I spent 8 hours a day sitting next to the copier, fielding phone calls and going online. And I found Joe's site, and I wrote to him, and I said, "Have you seen this?" Just like pretty nerdy. Right. Have you seen this? Have you seen that? Have you seen Runaway Nightmare? Have you seen Last Slumber Party? And I sent him some movies, and we became friends. And it was somewhere around September 2006. I wrote a few reviews, and then I've just been with the site ever since.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you have writing experience? Was that something that you wanted to do? Or?
I've been writing for a while. More or less on the struggling side of writing, but writing scripts and that sort of thing. And I loved reviewing, and I actually wrote a sort of a short novel right before I contacted Joe about a fictional movie reviewer named Cyril P. Drathmore, who reviews nothing but slasher films, but he believes they are the most wonderful films that God ever put on this earth, because he has no concept of a good film or anything like that. And so I loved writing reviews of slightly odd films, and so when I contacted Joe and he offered, I said, yeah, that's great. And so I've been reviewing since, like I said, around September 2006 or so.
Wow.
Awesome.
When did you know it could lead to a book? Was it when you just had enough momentum and enough reviews?
It was the actual story is that we were going to the New Beverly to see Something Weird, the Herschel Gordon Lewis film.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
And we got caught in traffic going up Barham Boulevard in Burbank, going by Warner Brothers. And we just sat there for hours and hours, and then it hit time for the movie to begin, and we were still sitting in traffic. And I said, why don't we just go get something to eat? We went to Jerry's Deli on Ventura, and at some point in there, we both kind of were talking about the site, and we said, we should write a book. And then it began coalescing and building and went through various iterations, and now it's the book.
It exists.
Yes, Bleeding Skull, a 1980s Trash-Horror Odyssey.
These are the kind of books that it takes me like 2 decades to read, because I get to one I like, I have to see the movie before I can read the next entry. But some of these are so fun, and I don't feel like you spoil everything. I think deep analysis put me off, but when you guys are just having fun with it, it's enough to hook you, like a trailer almost. Yeah. And I think that's what it seems to be, so that's cool.
How did you decide which titles to put in the book?
It was the original version of the book was going to be everything from the 80s, including stuff like Friday the 13th and Halloween, which we would never review for the site. But the more we did of those, the more we realized we didn't really have anything to say about it that was new and exciting. Yeah. And so we just whittled them all down to the most obscure thing. There are approximately 300 in there, and we just said number 300, and we just started going from there.
I'm gonna say something to you, and you're gonna tell me the title.
Oh no, I'm gonna try.
Or you're gonna because I read this on your site, and when I read it, I was like, you didn't then follow it up with the title. I'm like, this is the greatest thing I've ever read. So I'm gonna just read this. It's probably gonna be very easy. A pregnant woman in a bikini eats fried chicken before her fetus is ripped out.
Yes.
Please tell me the title of this movie.
It's one I actually watched with my wife recently.
Of course you did.
Las Vegas Bloodbath.
Okay, I'm writing this
down.
By
the way, and at the end of that, Elric just notes WTF with multiple exclamation points.
So can I have that again? Las Vegas
Bloodbath. That shot on video. It's actually it popped up on one of those strange like 2-disc 6-movie sets. Yeah. It's not like a Mill Creek set, but it's one of those like slashers and something or other set, and it's more several more modern films, and then the film Blood Cult retitled as Slasher
Yep, Blood
Like,
Cult is
holy
sitting on our
smokes.
table right now.
Yes, I'm looking at the Blood
What's the
got
story
my
of
page.
Blood Cult? I've never
It's
even heard
meant
of
to
this.
be. Well, I'm gonna let's go straight
This is
into
what the box
I
says.
got it. We had a VHS swap meet at Jump Cut, and I bought two things there, and this was one because I bought it. I'd never heard of it, but it was called the first movie made for the home video market. Is the tagline on this VHS cover? Might just scare you to
excitement.
death. Now, it definitely didn't scare me to death.
It may not scare
kind
you
of-
to death.
Put
And
me
it's
to
in the
sleep.
tradition of horror legends, Psycho, Halloween, and Friday the 13th.
You could say it's in the tradition.
It's one of those films you can drift off during and wake up
It is.
randomly
It really is.
throughout.
It really- No, and
you haven't
I'd
missed
say the
much, and it's
first
fun.
2/3 are actually really dull, and then suddenly there's the stuff with people in robes, and suddenly it
Yes.
was interesting.
Yes.
But it's a very strange film. But I was curious: do you know much about the history of this, and is it genuinely the first SOV?
As far as we know, no.
Okay.
Boarding House was.
Boarding House was shot on video.
Oh, really? I thought
and then
Boarding House was filmed.
Transferred
Here's
to
a picture
30
from it.
Yeah,
I've
there
seen
they are.
Boarding House
It's
before.
not Malcolm McDowell. It's just a lookalike.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
And it was transferred to 35 millimeter
Ah.
and shown in theaters. And we actually we did a sort of a book tour for the book, obviously, and we showed various movies that were in the book to audiences. And
cool.
one of them, Joe works for the Alamo Drafthouse in Austin. And he brought to Seattle, he lugged all the way up to Seattle, the 35 millimeter print of Boarding House. And he showed it.
I was at Phoenix Comic Con this past weekend, and I met the guy who distributed it there. I don't even remember what the name of the company was, but he even gave me the DVD. But he came up to me, and it was like out of nowhere, and he was like, "Have you ever seen Boarding House?" And I was like, "On VHS, like a long time ago." And he was like, "I did the DVD distribution," and then he was like off to his next adventure. So it was pretty cool.
That's pretty unusual to have been shown
yeah.
on video and go to film at that early.
Yeah.
That must, and also the process. I wonder what. I'd
looks-
like to see what that looks like.
It looks pretty strange. It's a sort of a strange, washed out adventure, and it was actually great too because the film is a bit over long, I think, although it's wonderfully nutty.
So is
I
Blood Cult.
recommend it
I
highly.
get the feeling like a lot of these films, sometimes, obviously there's some great movies in there and there's some like terrible movies, but the thing about them is there's always like a scene or a line of
moment.
dialogue
Something, an idea,
that you could
something.
never have imagined. in a
That's
regular
what
film.
happens when you write, direct, and edit
Right.
your own film.
Yes.
You have no one there telling
Yeah.
you might want to cut that
Yeah,
scene.
take it down about
Yeah.
get about 10 minutes out of there.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
with-
So you
with-
end up with a lot of the like batshit crazy fluff in there.
Do you know much
So-
about the Blood Cult origins of this film?
what I know about Blood Cult is that I believe it was made in Oklahoma.
Yeah,
and
I've read
the gentleman who directed it, who I want to say is it Christopher Lewis, I believe is his name.
Doesn't even say on the box. does it? Here, wait a minute. Director of photography. Who directed this? Yeah, Christopher Lewis. You're
Christopher
right.
Lewis.
Yes.
I if I remember the story correctly, and if I'm making some of this up, let's hope it's a good story.
Yeah, that's fine. We don't care.
I believe the story is that they saw how well horror films were doing when they went to video and how popular horror films were in the first half of the 80s, and they basically got together with a local TV station sort of and professionally, I mean, Blood Cult as far as shot on videos goes does look better than many of the shot on videos, like a camcorder one, like a Cannibal Camp Out or
Right, I've
or
seen
and
What was, because I feel like, I think SOV might be the ultimate black hole of my film knowledge. Because
Yeah,
since
I mean,
living
yeah, for
here,
sure.
I've really started to discover a few and realize some things I actually liked were SOVs without knowing.
Yeah.
But it's interesting now that we're with found footage where they really are SOVs
yeah.
and they've found a way to market them in a way that's actually popular. But do you know much about the origins or kind of how they did and what they were trying to compete? Because I really don't know a lot about it.
Well, what I know about the shot on videos, the Boarding House was the first one I know that was shot on video, but then transferred to film. Although most of the VHSs I've encountered and the DVDs are the video versions. They're not the film prints for some reason. That's Lunch Meat. That's a great one.
I was getting ready to say, Elric knows
Lunch Meat's a great
I'm a
site,
huge fan of the website and the
And the magazine's
fanzine,
really cool.
And I think they're amazing people. And he'd asked me at one point if I knew why it was called that, and I'm assuming that's
That's
it.
the title, yeah.
Yeah. So I would
That's
just-
interesting.
Yeah.
Now, was it? I mean, I guess
I'm
we've
sorry.
we've done a show. We've done shows like looking back at the boom of the VHS market. Do you know, when did it just kind of spring up as, hey, we can cash in on the home video market?
That's
Make
more or
these
less what
cheaply?
it was. Yeah, the first one I know of that was, and there's probably another one out there, but the first one I know of was Sledgehammer.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
1983.
yeah.
The Pryor brothers, and that's 83, and that's 2 years before Blood Cult, and that's sort of the first one I know of that was shot on video and direct-to-video.
What was the most well-known one? Nail Gun Massacre? Or?
Oh, Nail Gun Massacre is fantastic, but I'm not sure if it was the most.
That's
well,
the
that
one
would be
for
awesome.
some reason that I thought
I think it's
everyone
lasted.
knew of.
I think people now know it pretty well, maybe because of the tagline.
Like out of all of the SOV movies, I thought that was the one that had kind of had endurance.
That one, well, that one's actually, I think, shot on 16 millimeter.
Oh,
really?
So, yeah. So,
wow.
Well, they did such a good job that it looked like video.
That it looked like video.
Do you know, is there one that made a lot of money? Like, is there a particular
Blood
example?
Cult made a because they immediately made a follow up, The Ripper with Tom Savini, and then they made a sequel to Blood Cult shot on film called Revenge.
Wow.
Which you can watch or not watch depending upon how you're feeling.
How's that for sequels that they changed the name of all 2 sequels? Like, how are you cashing in on your sequel if you change the
Ripper?
name?
The Ripper isn't a sequel. It's sort of it's Jack the Ripper in a comes back in spirit of spirit comes back in a guy, and there's a lot of aerobicizing and dancing and things like that. So,
wow.
Totally.
And I know there's
Which
like
is
holy
awesome.
grails. Like I know we've been watching Adjust Your Tracking and what was the other one? Rewind This.
I watched both this past weekend.
No, then they both have pluses. They're both fun movies, but obviously the star of both at that stage was pre Chester Turner being discovered. And Tales from the Quad Dead Zone was like this holy grail. Yeah. I know you guys have some relationship with like Massacre Video as well.
Yeah. We did 2 of the shows we did for Bleeding Skull involved Mr. Turner being there. The one we did at Cinefamily here in LA, and the one in Chicago. And
how was he discovered? Like, how did they find him after all this time?
The story is...
And it's Black Devil Doll, for those listening.
Black Devil Doll from Hell.
A lot of people know.
It was basically the guy from Massacre Video just called Turner's in the Chicago phone book until he found Chester, and it was the way I was told was it was basically, are you the Chester Turner that made Black Devil Doll from Hell and Tales from the Quad Dead Zone? Yes. Oh, I want to talk to you. We want to put those out on DVD, and then
I want to hear the phone conversations for the other 200 people he called.
And so Quad Dead. The thing is, Black Devil Doll from Hell was actually distributed by, I want to say the company was called Hollywood Video, and they did a different cut of it, and they took out like 15 minutes of the film and added like a lot of they took out the Casio keyboard soundtrack and put in a lot of
terrible idea. Yeah, you don't take out Casio.
You do not take out the
any situation.
And Chester was so sort of angry with what they did that he distributed Tales from the Quad Dead Zone himself, which is why it's so rare.
How many copies would you, if you had to guess, that were there on VHS?
I don't know.
Like hundreds, or
I would say hundreds, but not a lot of hundreds.
Right, because I know one went for
it was a tremendous
amount. $100
that one pops up all the time, and I shouldn't say this out loud, but the bootleg circles I'm in, I see that title pop up all the time.
I know, but it must be different to own that authentic.
The original.
The thing is, I had a bootleg for the time, and the bootleg I had was like a copy of a copy of a copy, and so it was so washed out you could almost not make out the images. It was almost like an impressionistic painting, sort of. Right. It was just
in other words, it improved the film
across the screen. It made for interesting viewing because we've shown it. I was there for 2 screenings when we showed it to
Cinefamily?
Crowds. The Cinefamily, and it was standing room only. There were people standing alongside the
we had them on our show for that whole period.
When they were doing that month,
which was a great, great show. We got to see Abby.
Abby,
so fun.
It
was so fun.
I liked Deathbed.
Deathbed was wonderful.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
How did Chester respond? I mean, after kind of just being found out of nowhere on the phone and then showing his movies, how did he feel about this?
He was just so grateful and just he was a very nice guy. He was just and his brother was there at the Cinefamily show, and his brother was they were just nice guys. You just wanted to go, all right. Yes.
Did he have any secret films hidden away that he had made since that he never distributed, or that was it?
No, that was it. Yeah, and he did explain Tales from the Quad Dead Zone, because that was the first thing I asked was, what does that mean? And he said, well, Quad Dead is 4 stories. And I said, but it only has 3 in it. and he said, well, Black Devil Doll from Hell was the 4th story. But it expanded into a feature.
But it's not in the movie, and he still called it Tales from the Quad Dead Zone.
I didn't want to ask that one.
Tales from the Tri-Dead Zone doesn't sound as good.
Quad can fool you for a bit, I think.
Can.
That's
it sounds kind of post-apocalyptic.
And he's apparently also working on part 2 right now.
Oh, the Black Devil?
Tales from the Quad Dead Zone.
Yeah, now I've noticed people have been saying they're adapting the Black Devil doll for years. And one of the companies...
There's another one.
Sean
What,
Lewis
yeah.
did
Like
it.
a
He did it
musical
under
And is that
Rotten
something...
Cotton.
Did they get that legally from him, or did...
It's not going to be a Broadway musical, is it?
Right.
No,
But is
it
that
was
something
made
that
into a movie by Sean
Yeah, there
Lewis
was like
a couple of years
just
ago.
Black Devil doll.
Yeah.
But did they
That's what it is.
track him down to get the right? Like,
I
or
don't
is that
think
just
so.
something
We
that
all
got
thought
made?
he was dead for years.
Right.
That's what we were told, is that he was dead, and then suddenly one day he showed up and he's not dead.
Not dead.
Wow.
He was just in Chicago.
Yes, he
Like
was
a
in
lot of
Chicago.
people
That's
who
where,
think
that's
they were
where,
dead.
that's where he lives. So
It's interesting because I had seen it. I almost had a false impression of where that film came from, because I'd go to a convention, see it on a T-shirt, see the bobbleheads, and go, "Oh, okay, so it's a recent-ish film." And then it wasn't until all the Cinefamily stuff that I started seeing the old stills, going, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." Yeah.
And he said his favorite author is Rod Serling. He's a huge Twilight Zone fan.
Wow.
So we discussed Twilight Zone a bit too.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Neat, so.
Now, where do you find all your films from? I know it's kind of a constant quest for the three of us to find weird titles. So.
It's a mix of just looking a lot online in any video store I can find, and people randomly sometimes just handing us films, and Joe and Zach Carlson, who writes for the site, they find the most amazing things. They find all kinds of I find some great stuff, but they just keep coming up with this strange stuff that you've never heard of, that's never been released, and it's just like, where did you find these things? And I don't.
Are you a collector? Are you someone who collects things, or are you more?
I'm not a good collector. I like to have a copy that I can watch and enjoy. I don't need, if it's okay if it's like a copy of a copy, as long as I can watch it. I'm not a very good hunting down the original.
You don't need the
VHS
original
or
issue.
anything. Yeah, as long as I can watch it, I'm okay.
That's the problem, because I want to watch everything in a book like this, and then my problem is I can't afford like a Blood Cult. This VHS sitting in front of me cost me $20 at the swap meet.
Wow.
And I would say it's probably worth $4.
I'm telling you.
But it's like there are a lot of titles I want to see, but I don't want to own.
You don't
and
wanna
I don't want to buy,
yeah.
but I really like, it's really on eBay. I know The Black Room was one of my favorite things I saw last year, and that was something I'd seen on someone's list and tracked it down. It probably cost me like $30 or more.
Yeah.
But that was actually worth it, rarely. But it's like, is there any other way? Like, is there some library? Because Netflix doesn't have any of this shit.
No.
Could someone create a Bleeding Skull library that you
that would
borrow and
be
rent and
fantastic.
send them back?
I told them before the show started that I get a lot of my rare stuff from Trash Palace. Have you been to their site
yes,
before?
I have. Yeah.
He's awesome. And it's a lot of kind of really old, hard to find VHSs, but he does DVD transfers of them. And it's kind of an unapologetic thing just because these things aren't available anymore. So I don't think he's really kind of hurting anybody by doing it. So I buy them with gusto.
Yeah. Well, I one of the places I go on iOffer.
iOffer's great.
Type in a random title, and folks have all kinds of strange stuff. We found the wonderful Heavy Metal Massacre.
I got my copy of Leptarica off that. Have you seen Leptarica?
The title's familiar, but
It is a it's not Lithuanian. It is a vampire film from somewhere in Europe, very obscure in 1970s. And I told them about it on a show, and it came from my offer.
I actually saw one on your list that I had seen in Chicago on 35, which was the guy who was shooting behind the scenes of, is it a Roland vampire film with Christopher Lee? I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically like an avant-garde film.
Yes.
But it's a making of that's shot like a narrative, and it has these moments where Christopher Lee's, I think, putting on contacts or something, and his eyes twitch. It's
I forget
very
the name
strange.
of
But
it,
I saw it on your list today. I was like, oh, I've seen that in a theater presented as an art house thing, which was kind of cool. This is something I'm really curious about. Is there an auteur of SOVs that we should look out for, like somebody who's like got this big body of work and is maybe underrated, maybe a crap auteur? Just being an auteur, that doesn't mean good. Just means an author.
In the 80s, most of the folks who made SOVs usually made one and then went away. I mean, you had Chester making two. You had Jeff Hathcock, who made Victims and Streets of Death and Fertilize the Blaspheming Bombshell. That's the Trauma title. I don't know what the actual title is. And he also did Night Ripper. And at least 2 of those are shot on video. And all of his films, if you watch his films, they all have sort of a similar outlook on life, which is not very pleasant. And Night Ripper, in fact, was the first shot on video I ever watched. Back in college, I rented it, and I sat there, and about 5 minutes in, I thought, is this shot on video? And I wanted to run up and down the halls of the dorm and tell everyone that I was watching something shot on video. But
I'm curious, did you see the movie?
That was going to be my next question about everybody around the room, their first time discovering these, because it's a little jarring. I mean, I don't, when I'm a kid renting these, I don't understand movies yet, but you see theatrical things and you see things that are made on film, for example, and then you come across your first shot on video thing where you're like, wow, this looks like the crappy home videos we make.
You know what? It's the difference of escapism. It eliminates escapism, right?
I guess.
Like you go to a movie to escape, and this is like, no, I found you, and I'm coming to your house.
It's so frustrating though, because then because of course I tried to film stuff with my friends, and I'm like, why is it so crappy? I don't understand why it's not like that. But so you were just saying in college is the first time you discovered a shot on video title,
because I was renting stuff like crazy, and then I just happened to one of the pile of things I rented one day was Night Ripper, and I had never heard of it, and I just hit play, and I just sat there looking at it, just thinking, this is on video, and it's one of those shot on video ones where, like a Blood Cult, where they try to make it look a little more they try to make it look like a film rather than say like a Quadad or a Blood Lake or
Do you think that's a good thing? I tend to think it's worse.
I tend to think it's tricky too, because
it makes you notice that it's false more.
Something happens to the pacing of those too.
And
I don't know what it is.
I also think the filters and the camera movements start to look a little fake. Whereas, I honestly think this is the reason why found footage is largely popular, is because it's not trying those things, and because of that, they find some way to justify why it's all shaky, and somehow we just buy it. Reality TV, we kind of just buy it.
But that's also because we're in the YouTube generation.
We are.
We're very used
video.
to seeing things this way, so it's not that jarring. How about you, Rebekah? Do you remember the first time you discovered a shot on video title?
I do, actually. Moron movies. And it was not even a horror film. Have you seen Moron movies?
I have seen Moron
movies.
What are these?
So when I was in high school, my 2 friends, Leslie and Emily, and I, we watched every movie that we could possibly get our hands on, mostly horror, but we were big fans of the Kentucky Fried Movie and Amazon Women on the Moon. And the video store that we always went to was this place called On Track Video, and it was really small, and the guy who worked there, knew us and everything. And he told us one day, if you guys really like these kind of, little sketch movies, you should watch these. And he handed us the Moron movies. And there was a couple of different series of them. And we loved them. But
are they British?
No. This was literally an old guy in his garage doing sketches. And it would just be things like, I can't even begin to discuss it. Do you remember any of them?
I haven't seen them since college, but I do remember we did rent and watch a few of them. Yeah,
they were all shot on video. Most of them, it was very clear that it was this guy's garage and he was shooting them. And I have to find some of them, but they were hilarious. And I mean, well, some of them were more like, ironically funny, just because they were kind of silly. But some of them were genuinely funny. But he had a couple of different versions of them. I think maybe 3 at least 3 I watched. But yeah, it was just this guy with a very stationary home camcorder. You could tell it was just locked on a tripod, and him like doing crazy sketches in front of it all by himself.
Wow.
Is he in either of those documentaries, Rowan the Sir or Adjust Your Tracking?
I've only seen Adjust Your Tracking, and he was not in that. I just watched Adjust Your Tracking last night.
So, oh, really? Oh, wow.
What about you, Elric? Do you remember your first one?
I don't know if I would, because in New Zealand, I grew up in New Zealand, and so this stuff would have just come, and it would have just been on a video shelf like everything else. Like everything was straight to video to us. Like Warlock goes to the movie theaters.
Yeah, but you would have noticed a difference, or
probably,
maybe not.
But the first I remember, but that was living here. I think maybe I was like 20. I don't even know how I saw a copy of this, but you almost just said it a second ago. You guys had family ties. That was the family you grew up with. My favorite cinematic family, Woodchipper Massacre.
I was going to say,
one of the most beautiful families to ever exist.
Fantastic.
That movie is so it's like watching a bad, crappy local car commercial where they're like, hey, come on down to and it's this entire movie, and there's no blood, but the sister and the son, or the brother, the young brother, are 2 of the most out there. Yeah. Some of the drama is like, it really will blow your mind.
Yes.
And it's funny. It's actually genuinely funny. They're not trying to be funny. And it just has this storyline. I can't remember if it's the uncle or someone who comes home to...
Yeah, it's like the dad goes away, and then like an aunt comes to stay with them.
And she's really mean.
And then her son shows up and he's a crook.
He's the mean one. He's the bad
and
one.
And they end up, I don't want to ruin too much, but a Woodchipper is involved.
I'm kind of on the edge of my seat.
I had it, but it's shot like it literally feels like a bad version of Family Ties.
It does.
Like
exactly.
literally Family Ties.
Like it could have a laugh track.
Yeah, I posted a photo through here before a long time ago. You might remember early Killer POV, and I put a photo of the son because it's just there's something about. But I will ask you this before we keep going around. I did write this one down. I wanted to know what's your favorite Massacre film, if it's not Woodchipper or Nail Gun or Texas. Is there any, like, I know there's a fridge one, a microwave one.
There's Microwave Massacre, Heavy Metal Massacre.
I haven't seen Heavy Metal Massacre.
Heavy Metal Massacre is almost sort of it's almost like a surreal strain. It's very tough to describe. It's a very odd heavy metal-y guy with sort of spiked gloves and very. If you look in the book under Heavy Metal Massacre, there's a picture of him, Bobby, and he's very. I think he's like a bodybuilder now, so he's a huge guy. So I don't want to say anything
in case he's
in case, but he's very sort of like if you encounter the hair metal, like sort of a Poison or Cinderella, rather effeminate looking hair metal guy.
Oh, that person?
So, yes.
Oh, wow.
Where?
And
wow, he looks like the lead singer of Hanoi Rocks.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And he just kind of hangs out and he kills people and
weird.
And I think it's shot in Rhode Island, I believe.
That's something we often end up talking about here that we all kind of love is the regional filmmaking in general.
Yeah.
And SOVs, I guess, and things that were super low budget are the ultimate. And they're the hardest, and maybe this is the problem, they're hard to track down because they're limited releases, you know.
And it's certain films I've noticed there are some of the films I love, like The Hackers or Haunted Ween.
Oh, yeah. I've got Haunted Ween, yeah.
Or now I found Zombies Invade Pittsburgh. Which is Pittsburgh without an H, which is Pittsburgh, California. I happened to Google it just a few days ago, and the guy who made it has a site, and I believe he's selling DVD copies.
Wow.
Well, I remember when Intervision first kicked off, a year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever. And so I went to Sledgehammer in the theater, and it just did nothing for me, and almost put me off wanting to see another. I don't know why. I can't explain it. And then I saw Things, and I thought Things was like a genuine masterpiece. Like I'm not even kidding. Like comedy wise, I think it's genuinely hilarious.
Yeah,
like there's something about that movie that's like a little bit of magic, And
it straddles that point of the 80s going into the 90s, where it has it's got the sort of whole lot of gore starting up that would be all over the place in the 90s.
It's like Evil Dead 2 of bad SOVs.
Yeah,
Canadian.
It's just mostly just guys hanging around, and then every once in a while these little bugs attack them.
It's really weird.
It's pretty great.
What about Rob? Did you have a early memory?
Yeah. For me, it's weird because it's I've been going to Fangoria weekend of horror shows ever since I was 15 years old. And at one point when I was kind of at the thick of the video, just finding anything on video, you go to these conventions and now you're on a quest, like, I want to find something that no one's ever heard of, and that's when I first found, shot on video stuff, because a lot of these guys would sell them at a table, they'd make their own copies or whatever. And the first one I discovered was called Addicted to Murder. And it was by this filmmaker named Kevin J. Lindenmuth.
Oh, Lindenmuth.
Lindenmuth.
Okay.
He did a whole series of these. And the sheer irony is, so I got Addicted to Murder, which is like this vampire story starring Sasha Graham, who did a lot of these like shot on video kind of New York style horror movies. And the irony is that years later, I think this is about 1999, my buddy Jay Alvino, who did some writing with me in the beginning days of Icons of Fright, he was an effects artist, and he had worked, I think, with Kevin in some capacity on just like, they're shooting these things like completely illegally in Central Park or whatever,
cool.
Just to do their little horror movies. And I think he just called Jay up one day because he didn't have an effects guy, like, hey, I'm doing a werewolf thing in the park today. Can you come and help me out? So I went with him. And as a result, because again, they're just kind of running and gunning, I inadvertently became the bounty hunter that kills one of the werewolves.
So you're in one.
In Rage of the Werewolf.
Nice.
Now,
is that a copy you can post this week or not?
No.
You don't have a copy?
I have a VHS copy, but it has never made its way in any digital form. But no, that was the first time.
Maybe that's a law or something.
But I thought that was interesting, the idea of that's like the first version of independent filmmakers that are outside of the studio system really taking it into their own hands. I mean, this guy shot videos all over New York City, and then he'd make X amount of copies, and he'd take a little table at Fangoria Weekend of Horrors and sell them directly to fans. Now, I don't want to put Kevin down. I'm sure he's a super nice guy and a very talented guy. But, as a kid, you're like, oh, this isn't very good. Just because you don't understand the difference between, it's not shot on film or anything. And then much later, I became a somewhat obsessed. Well, not obsessed. That's a terrible term to use. Nathan Schiff.
Oh, yeah.
Only because he's from Long Island, which is where I'm from. And he did a movie called Long Island Cannibal Massacre. Yeah. And then another one called Weasels Rip My Flesh. And I'm like, who the hell is this guy? I thought I was the only weirdo from Long Island. And this guy's got a couple of years on me.
Yeah, we've got some of those in the book. I reviewed They Don't Cut the Grass Anymore.
Okay, yeah. And I remember...
Why?
I remember...
Is there a reason?
Because they're friggin' nuts is what it is. Two hillbilly brothers.
Town of people who went crazy and stopped mowing the lawn.
I gotta admit, I bought all 3 of his movies, of those 3 that we just mentioned, on DVD.
Oh, yeah.
And I had to hunt for them. And I kind of regret selling them before I moved out here because they were shot on video and not very good. Yeah. So I don't remember a single thing about any of them, but I'd like to rewatch them again.
They Don't Cut the Grass Anymore is very gory, like Herschel Gordon Lewis style gory, where you just kind of sit there and bits of guts are pulled out of things that kind of look human and that kind of thing. But to the point where you actually kind of got a little physically ill because it was just sitting there for ages. This stuff was being pulled out. And
what's the most shocking one you've seen where you're literally like, oh my God, or just like, holy cow, how does this exist as a film? I mean, there must have been tons of these kind of.
Yeah, there's. I don't know in the book. I mean, They Don't Cut the Grass Anymore was pretty rough as far as the gore went. I'd have to flip through to see like.
Is there something that you saw where you're like, that is like, how have I not seen this movie before? How has the world not witnessed this movie?
I see those all the time. Those are great.
I want to know about this one.
Which one? Oh, the bloody video horror that made me puke on my Aunt Gertrude. Yeah, Joe.
I've seen the title of that before.
Why have I not seen this
I tweeted
before?
that title recently, but I didn't know where I got it from.
This is actually one of the few that I haven't seen. Okay. Joe reviewed this one, and this gentleman made another one that has a very similar sort of title, something like something with an ant and boobs or something.
That's got to be a T-shirt. That's right there.
I need that shirt.
Yeah.
And I just read the review, and apparently Aunt Gertrude isn't anywhere in it, and there's only one puking scene. So.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, this is exciting for us because, obviously, the 3 of us are seasoned horror veterans at this point. We've seen a lot of stuff. But I mean, just skimming through both your book and the website, it's like, man, I have not even heard of a good chunk of these.
Yeah.
I mean, all the titles that you guys are throwing out now, with the exception of very few, I've never seen. So
Las Vegas Bloodbath.
Uh-huh.
That's one of the really disturbing ones.
Yeah, that one's the one
I
one
asked
with
about the fried chicken, and the
fried chicken. Actually,
fetus.
it's there. I guess the story behind that was it was some guy who did like a haunted house for Halloween and in Las Vegas and did really gory effects for it. He did the effects for this, and there are just scenes. There is a scene, where he pulls the fetus out of a woman and throws it against the wall, and you could tell he's going to do it because the wall is covered with like a white paper. So you can why is that wall covered?
So the color will bounce.
Okay,
yeah.
But that woman actually she's very pregnant and she has these long nails, and there's just a scene where she's like eating pizza and other foods, and it's actually a little bit grosser than the scene of the fetus being.
Well, and it goes back to the great Stephen Throw book, Nightmare USA.
Oh yes,
it's that idea that, and I always think of Manos, Hands of Fate. You go back to there's these amazing stories behind all these movies, even if they're exploitive, even if it's a group of dentists who thought, we could make a straight to video, let's shoot blood cold. I find those just incredible. I could watch a documentary endless hours about the making of all these movies.
What was the name of the documentary that you and I had both seen it? Now I can't remember the name of it. It was 2 guys driving cross country.
Demon Lover Diary.
That's
one of my favorite things I've ever seen.
Fantastic. Yeah.
It's like before there was making ofs. It's this amazing, and the best thing is the documentarian, the cameraman, is going to be the cinematographer of this actual horror movie, and I wish that was available in a
I'd love
I think I've seen bootlegs.
It's always been a bootleg.
A Demon Lover Diary set. So
Criterion. That's a Criterion.
Yeah, very much just Blu-ray Criterion.
Definitely a case where the document making of was better than the film, but that's okay. But is there what's one of the funnier ones you've seen where it's more just humor based?
Oh, humor based.
What's a good party movie?
I would say to me, one of my favorites I just passed here was Blood Lake.
Blood Lake,
which is which is shot on video.
That one had a really good poster back in the day, I remember.
That did have a great one, yeah. And Blood Lake is basically it's a bunch of dudes and their chicks go into like a summer house along a lake, and the first 40 to 45 minutes of the movie is them hanging out, drinking, water skiing to some great heavy metal by the band Voyager. And I
assume they didn't pay for rights for that.
I don't. The Voyager does a lot of songs in the movie, so I'm guessing it was probably a best friend or something would be my guess. And there's actually a scene in Blood Lake, which is this is one of the things I love about shot on videos, and it's not a scary thing. So it's sort of an acquired taste kind of moment. Is there is a scene where all the guys and all the gals, they're hanging out, they just ate, they got all their beers, they're sitting around the dinner table, and they start playing quarters, where you hit the quarter and it flips in and the camera just sits there and they play quarters I timed it once. They played for about a minute and a half to 2 minutes, just going around the table. And then at one point, it's very subtle. You can see it like dissolve to the same shot, but later in the scene as they're playing quarters, and they play for a couple more minutes. And then half of them go home, and the other half go to bed.
I want to know what happened that they had to cut the scene. Like the quarters game got too crazy.
The director's cut would be the whole,
just a tiny little bump in the tripod.
But that's one where they they're just hanging out, and there's a character called Little Tony who's like a high school younger high school kid who's constantly trying to get in the pants of the high school gal he brought along, and he's wonderfully sleazy and goofy. And they go water skiing for about 5 minutes as the cock rock plays, and then they stop, have lunch, and then they go water skiing again. And
I've always joked about that. Like, imagine a version of, like, say, a Die Hard type movie, but where you cut out all the action and show the parts where they went to the bathroom, made lunch, and just that's what the art house is for.
That's mostly what
these movies are.
And the last 20 minutes or so, kind of a killer arrives, and I don't know if it's in the book. I won't ruin the reason for why he's committing the killings is awesome.
Okay, that's a good sell.
And so I would recommend Blood Lake if you can find a copy, just because it's a great example of it's hanging out horror. It's just like, I don't know. I'd love to say that it was in a script. I'd love to say that. Bless you.
Excuse me.
Are there any great movies? And I don't mean just from like your not from your opinion of like, hey, this one's I think's really fun, but like objectively, if you're going like, there is a couple films that got just lost in the shuffle. Is there anything that should be rediscovered?
Like big gems that you were watching, going, why is this not more known?
Because sometimes these films just for rights reasons remain undistributed. Yeah.
Well, like Demon Lover Diary.
Yeah.
It's just a really good movie.
One of the covers I saw that somebody said they're going to send me a copy because I want to see it. The Jar. I haven't.
Oh, The Jar.
I've never seen The Jar. That looked good to me.
It's worth it's worth a viewing.
Yeah.
It's certainly strange. Yeah.
I wrote down one that this one actually I watched the trailer just before I came. It looked really cool, but it looked like a real movie. It didn't look like an SUV. It was called The Power.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And I saw it like a Aussie road show, and it looked great.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is this movie?
Yeah, it's made by the guys who made The Dorm, The Drip Blood.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. This is their second movie, and it's a little more professional.
I did not enjoy The Dorm, The Drip Blood.
It has its charms.
Yeah, there's moments.
I was very annoyed that all of a sudden at the end, the killer's like, oh, hey, guys, it's me. I did it.
I love that.
It's
oh, my
me.
God.
I did it.
But it's about as exciting as Final Exam.
Yeah. No, I think Dorm, The Drip Blood is a little more exciting.
I will actually say that I just bought the Final Exam Blu-ray.
Oh, yeah.
Because if Final Exam is actually one of my favorites.
Before we move forward, why?
Because we all were a little bored.
Watched it. We all watched Rebekah's copy.
Oh, I can understand completely why you'd be a little bored. No, I love it. The reason why I love it is because I just love the fact that for the first hour, and you have to set aside all your sort of preconceived notion of the way a slasher film works, and for the first hour, it's a story, and whether or not you find it interesting is I obviously do, but it's a story about folks at the end of a semester on a college just living their lives, and they do it for an hour. And I know it's a slasher film, and more people should die sooner, but they do it for an hour, and then in the space of 20 minutes, everyone of them but one of them gets killed.
Yeah.
And there's just something about the way you're watching these lives, regardless of if you find them interesting, that are just continuing, and they're going somewhere. And then one by one, they're all snuffed out. And there's something about that always affects me. And I saw it on the big screen a few years ago, And I was like, oh, I do like this movie.
Wow,
this is a good movie.
That almost made it sound poetic.
Yeah, I must
say. So that's what I mean, but I can understand.
And a great faux terrorist attack. I love the faux terrorist attack. That's my favorite part of that.
Wild Man. Yeah,
Wild Man's just a character.
And I can understand completely, though. It is one of those movies.
You love the Blu-ray. It looks fantastic.
Yeah,
you can see that killer, that denim killer, very, very clearly.
And we all love that it came out on Blu-ray. I mean, that's the thing. As much as we might not love that particular film, we love the fact that it came out on Blu-ray. It's amazing that they do that.
Yeah.
The one I was asking about, the power, do you think that's something that's just not available? Or
I have a VHS copy myself.
Then I will borrow. I would love it.
I would think it would, because Dorm the Drip Blood is on Blu-ray.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. It was released by Synapse a couple of years ago.
You would think the power's a little more professional.
It did. It looked big. It had like big people flying in the air, and I was like, "What is this great looking movie?"
I've never seen it.
Yeah, it was just. I was flipping through their site today. The other one was, and I couldn't find anything on this one online. Like not a trailer, not a still. It's meant to be the Indonesian Nightmare on Elm Street, and it's called Satan's Bed. And the still of it looked amazing.
Yeah. Really?
And I wonder if it's a translation problem because I couldn't even find a still on
in the book. We actually have two more Nightmare on Elm Street. They're Indian.
What are they? Because I know one. I've always seen the cover of one.
And their coverage of this title, it's great because they're like, look, there's 20 minutes. I'll be honest, there's 20 minutes of this that's actually kind of amazing, and then there's the rest of the movie that you'll have to get through just to get to those parts.
It's Kahuni Murda.
Okay.
But the stills of this looked crazy.
Kahuna
it looked very much like Nightmare on Elm Street, but with a crazy person coming out of a bed and dragging you down. Yeah, but these rip-off movies are always fascinating. The Turkish rip-offs.
One of them, I forget which one, has one of the musical numbers has just a fantastic scene where maybe it's
the simple fact that you said musical number.
Musical number and Nightmare on Elm Street rip-off.
And it's great. There's a woman in a bathtub, and suddenly it's right here, actually.
So is this like a Bollywood film where it's got like full musical numbers? Holy shit, I have to see this.
Yeah, that sounds great.
BJ, you will love this too.
Yeah,
it's Cooney Murda, and I forget the other one. I can find it for you, but it's in the book. It's possibly starts with an H. But they're two, and one of them is sort of just a free form Nightmare on Elm Street kind of thing, and one of them actually like rips off scenes exactly from Nightmare on Elm Street. But it does stuff like in Nightmare on Elm Street 3, there's the scene where the gal is lifted off the ground and slammed into the TV set. This does a similar thing, except the TV is at the level of her head, and so it's just basically
dramatic.
Arms reach out and just push her forward,
right?
Pull her forward.
I got to see this.
And so,
exactly. I'm on board with this.
And the final scene, they're in like a big dream house, like in Dream Warriors. Except instead of like big Dungeons and Dragons style things and all kinds of stuff like that, it's basically like the guys all just jump on top of Freddy and punch him a bunch, and then he goes away.
I'll do it. Why do you think the thing that I find most interesting about, because I'm on board, and that's the weird thing. It's not, there's this nostalgia, there's this comeback of VHS, and it makes sense because of when we were all raised. But here's the question. Why don't we give a shit about things being made now like this? Like the people who are making stuff that's seems kind of shitty, and they're making on video, and I'll say, what's that, Chemical Burn? Or there's some companies that just make a lot of stuff. I'm not saying they're all shitty. Yeah, I wouldn't want to say they're all shitty. There's probably a couple good movies in there. But in general, I'd say most of us wouldn't be excited. In fact, we wouldn't, I can be pretty honest, we wouldn't be doing a show about that right now.
Yeah. I have a theory.
Is it just too much stuff being made?
I'd like to hear that theory, because I've wondered about that myself and never quite.
You know what? Because I think timing is everything. Okay, and when I see these newer trailers, these newer movies that are trying to capture that, the difference is I look at it and I'm like, I've seen that. I don't care anymore.
Right.
Whereas a lot of this stuff was coming out on video. I mean, that's the first time we were seeing it.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? It's like we were hearing titles and movies and stuff. We didn't have access to movies, 10 years before the advent of video, when we were we didn't have access to movies this way. So
or IMDb for the research, so you had to find them in very unique ways.
For us, it's like, we're just fine. It's kind of tapping into this area where we're just starting to see these movies for the first time. So, I'll look at an image from Satan's Bed, which is probably no better than something like that you just mentioned. But like, I want to fucking see that, because it also, it's from that period where I don't know. I feel like now they put too much thought into like, oh, this is the kind of vibe we're going for. Where back then it was just
more of a free for all.
It was a free for all.
Yeah.
Everybody was just trying to make monies and get in on the video market.
Amazing.
And all
like
that.
Lady Terminator is pretty amazing.
Lady Terminator is
like
fantastic.
you watch it and you want to laugh at it and you go, it's funny, but it's also kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And yet it is just a ripoff, and it's so there. I am very curious about it because I definitely feel it. I see a lot of these, like even to be honest, even like I look at Jim Warnowski stuff or these mashups of that Corman's still producing of Sharktopus or whatever, and they just don't interest me at all. But if that exact same existed 30 years ago, I'd watch it.
And I mean, it's true because like Shout Factory puts out all the Roger Corman stuff, and it's like I'm more inclined to watch one of those bad movies from the 80s that he produced over Sharktopus or whatever he's doing now.
But there are still some of the ones that are coming out that are really tiny, being put out by companies like Chemical Burn, that if you watch them, they do have some value. It's just, you kind of have to sift through the bad to get there. Like there was one from Chemical Burn that came out a couple years ago called We Are All Meat. And it was really quite good. It was told from the perspective of a zombie who still had a human child. And he was a zombie, but he still had enough consciousness that he wanted to keep his human child protected. And so that was the whole story, was him traveling through a zombie landscape. And it was low budget and it had slow points, but it was really good.
It might just be a question of I know personally I might just be a little tired is what it could be, and when I see all the new movies come out and everything, I don't have back in the 80s and the 90s I could sit all night and watch these movies one after, and I would watch everything regardless of what it was. Nowadays if I get 10 or 15 minutes in and it hasn't done anything for me, I might switch over, put on an episode of the Rockford Files or something like that.
Do you get new submissions of new films? Do people send you some of these kind of movies?
Every once in a while they do. We don't really go too far past the 90s,
right?
With what we do. I think the only filmmaker that we do modern stuff from is Dave the Rock Nelson.
Makes
I don't know
sense.
if you've heard of him.
What does he do?
He bills himself as the modern day Ed Wood, which that logo always drives me crazy, just because I always say like Ed Wood
thought he was a genius.
Ed Wood didn't want to be Ed Wood. He wanted to be Orson Welles.
That's
so why would you strive a little higher, folks? But I mean, he does what he does and he does it well. So
who's the guy who did Werewolf in a Woman's Prison and the recent Rat movie? His stuff's actually kind of amazing. Like of these he kind of like Damon Packard, and Damon's is more cosmic and out there. But this guy, what is his name? He's a local guy, but he's an effects guy mostly. He's Werewolf in a Woman's Prison, and then last year did something with rats. And the effects are always kind of amazing. And so it's like, and I think his stuff actually does deserve. I wish I feel better. Forgot his name, but Jeff Leroy. I think it's Jeff Leroy. But even so, even though they're amazing because of the kind of thing they're doing, I think it falls through the cracks.
Yeah.
And doesn't get seen, quite the same way. Full disclosure, I did play a werewolf in Piranha Man versus Werewolf Man for Chemical Burn.
And that's awesome.
So if you want to go there and rent that movie, if it's even rentable, you will maybe
weren't
see
you
it.
also like a mole
I'm
man?
Lizard Man. No, Lizard Man. But that only just came out. Lizard Man's just coming out now. I don't know.
We are like learning about all our cameos.
We have some cameos.
Dan and Rebekah, have you appeared in any of these movies or what?
I have not.
Now's the time to come clean.
I was almost in an episode of The X-Files.
Really?
Almost.
Yeah, Dave and I, we were walking down the streets of DC and they were actually shooting The X-Files and they were like, okay, you're going to have to walk through the scene and do a disclaimer. And Dave, as soon as I was like, oh, cool, we're going to be on an episode. And as soon as we left the scene, Dave was like, I got really nervous and I was totally staring at the lens. And I was like, you messed up our chance and you fucked up their shot. Way to go, Dave.
Yeah, don't look at the lens, whatever you do. But yeah, no, I think it's interesting that there. What do you think beyond nostalgia? Because I don't think that's enough. I mean, I think there's something more. There's something about wanting to see more. Like we've seen all our favorite '80s movies, right?
Yeah.
Where do you go from there?
That's the thing is that I mean one of the Bleeding Skull, and it maybe Joe may state it in the book somewhere, but our theories there's always one more. You can always find one more, and it's always kind of astounding how many more there are out there. I mean, it's amazing. When we were doing the book, we thought, at the last minute we were stepping forward with, I'm trying to think of the last movies we put in there. I want to say, is it the Brain Sucker? I forget what they are now. They've left the Brain Sucker, and one called like Sorority Babes and the Creature from Hell, I believe is one. And these last minute things. Blue Murder, one of those the Indian Nightmare on Elm Street films. They just kind of like, oh, we got to put this in here, and it was like, oh yeah, let's do it. And there always seems to be another one, and it's and I don't think it's just nostalgia because I get I can get very nostalgic about things, but my energy wears out on that fairly quickly.
I think I was trying to do nostalgia for Blood Cult, and it wasn't enough. Whereas other ones I've seen, like Things, I'm genuinely moved or affected.
Things is genuinely nuts. So that's
funny,
whereas Blood Cult is a little too controlled for its own good, I think.
I mean,
although the scene.
You couldn't make Disconnected now. That was a pleasant surprise that we all saw in a communal experience.
When it ends, she goes and the guy comes out and goes down the steps. I just sat there, go, what? I love it. What's happening?
But somehow it had that major song in it. I can't even remember the Ecstasy song.
Right.
That's right. It kept cutting to the one band.
Yeah, and I was like,
it.
how did they afford this song?
And I didn't realize it was the same woman playing the two. It was like right near the end.
It's like a doppelganger, and then you realize that they kind of look alike. It was weird. I had that moment as well.
She pops up in a bunch of films too. That actress, I want to say her name is Frances Raines, but I could be lying. She's in some Tim Kincaid films like Riot and 42nd Street and Breeders.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember looking her up. She
Breeders.
She has some relation to Claude Rains, I believe.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, we did look that up. She
Yeah.
was his niece or something like that. I remember that now.
Yeah. I like it. She's great. And
good, yeah.
There
was actually, that one murder halfway through that film where he flips out the knife, and it's actually shot kind of elliptically, almost like a art house montage, like or something like a Renee film or something. It's actually a moment where it's good filmmaking for a second, and you're like, oh wow, that was pretty cool, and then it goes back to the rest of the movie, the wide shots and video stores of characters talking. There's a couple of I pulled out that I was just curious. Some came maybe from the Joseph's list. The cool thing, one of my favorite features on your site is you guys do like best of 13, best of 12 each, all four of you, the different stick it in your ear.
I think that's
kind of amazing.
That's a Joe favorite, I believe.
Do you know? Have you seen it?
I haven't seen that one.
Okay, I'll let that one die. Blonde Death.
Blonde. Oh, I almost that's a Zach favorite.
Okay,
yeah, that's last time I visited Joe in Austin. I wanted to watch it.
Okay,
but
so
for some reason we didn't. But they tell me
it's good to know
fantastic.
that you haven't seen it all either, because otherwise it would be.
That's part of the joy. If I'd seen it all, I'd get.
You'll expire. The Black Crystal is actually probably my favorite of all the titles.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, the Dark Crystal.
I believe that's.
Okay, I was going to say.
Yeah, that's Radon Films.
Have you seen that one?
I have not seen that one. But
that one looked cool from the stills. So I'm picking all the ones you haven't seen. My apologies.
Oh no, that's okay. That's okay.
I went through
like
and
copies,
got my favorite.
please.
So you included Night of the Bloody Apes.
Oh,
which
Night of the Bloody
is
Apes,
freaking batshit crazy.
Yeah.
It's like a rapist gorilla is the best way I could describe it. A guy gets a chest transplant, and it's been a long time since I've seen it, so forgive me. It's either his lungs or his heart.
I want to say it's his heart.
Okay, comes from a gorilla, and then he kind of transforms into like a raping gorilla.
Yeah. And it's Mexican, and it's wonderfully.
Yeah, because his sister's trying to be a wrestler.
Yes,
and so there's all these like wrestling scenes. Like it
stuff.
cuts with all these wrestling scenes, and then it goes back to the raping gorilla. It's pretty batshit crazy. Actually, it was a video nasty, right?
Yes.
It was played as part of the. I know Cinema Family played that one as part of their Video Nasty Nights when they did the whole month. The year before. Is there what's the most obscure country you've seen a film? Because the interesting thing about video is, and now especially, it does open up nations who you could have a film come out of Nigeria where never a film might have come from a place. Have you come across anything you're like, where the hell is this from? Like, I'm always curious about it. Or would it be Indonesia?
I was going to say Atlantis, but I'm lying if I said that.
A found footage film from Atlantis is not a bad idea.
We're making it next weekend.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good.
There are Indonesian, Turkish, Indian, Greek. Things like
because they'll have film industries of a kind, right?
Yeah.
So I'm always curious if anything. I'd love to research.
Yeah, I'd love to something from like Nigeria or something.
Well, like how
that.
Ghana has the film posters.
Yeah,
but I'm curious. I wonder if they have any films. I have no idea. If anyone knows if there's a Ghana film, I have no idea.
That's one like with the there are a few wonderful Mexican films in the book that are just crazy. Just.
Like there's Narco Cinema ones, they're insane.
Yeah.
I saw that Vice guide to Narco Cinema. Narco Cinema, the idea is that basically it'll involve something to do with drug dealers, the drug lords, a giant truck, and people with hats, and then a band. What are the bands called? Mariachi band that will tell the story, which is a real thing. It makes it where they'll tell the story of that drug lord and his rise to power. And they're shot on video, and they are blockbusters in their country, like on video. They're rented, like people will rent that. The guy who did like Ameris Peros was interviewed on this thing about it, and he's like, probably 1% of Mexico will see my movie, which has become a huge hit in America, and like 90% of them will see this straight to video thing with a guy with a white hat and a bad guy with a black mustache. And Vice Guide to Cinema did like, it's like a 20-minute thing online, but it's a great like 20 minutes, really entertaining about like the best actor of it. And it's really,
Who did that?
Well, Vice Guide did a whole series at one point where they did that. They looked at North Korean cinema. They looked at Russian parallel cinema, which was like LSD, avant-garde stuff. And it was just that guy, Shane Smith, going into these countries and looking at these really weird stuff. But the Narco one was like next level. Like the others were all really interesting. The Narco one was like incredibly entertaining. Like probably my favorite thing of that year was discovering that 25-minute thing,
Yeah.
But what's interesting, I think it is relevant to what we're talking about, is that like, we don't all just assume that the American Hollywood movie is just what everyone in the world needs or wants and is going to watch. But there's people, because they're too poor to even pay for a ticket price, so they have to see something else.
Apparently there's an entire grouping of South African horror films as well that I've gotten emails about at Fango, but we don't...
New or old? Like recent?
Both. Like recent ones. Like there's an emerging, and it's all very indie.
There was a zombie one last year, the bigger one. I can't remember what it's called. It actually got a proper release and it was set in South Africa.
Yeah, we've gotten a couple of like big emails about, there's this huge horror movement going on in South Africa, but we never are in touch enough with the country or know anybody who's in touch enough with the country to do like full coverage on it. But I'm always so amused when I hear about horror like kind of emerging from these countries. It's awesome.
I do get that vibe that like that thing Francis Ford Coppola said about video back in the day, like, the next great movie is going to be a 7-year-old fat girl in Wisconsin. That crazy quote. I actually think there's something to that, but it'll be like some crazy place we don't even know. We're like, wow, I guess you were talking about the Iranian black and white vampire film that
that was made here though.
That was made here, but it's interesting. I mean, that's probably helping the marketing of it.
A little. It's very unique.
It just
in that
sold,
sense.
I think. That's
true.
It is
Girl Who Walks Alone at Night. Is that the name of it? Something like that.
And speaking of distribution, Cards of Death.
Oh, Cards of Death, yes.
And Bleeding Skull. Tell us more. And my T-shirt, I realized as I was putting it on, Mondo Video.
It's Joe and Zach have started Bleeding Skull Video. And as far as I know, it's going to be approximately 4 releases a year forever. For as long as possible.
Not Us the Reflection. Not Us the Reflection.
Oh, Not Us the Reflection would be great. That's Satan, by the way. And that in the book, my review of Not Us the Reflection includes quotes from my mother-in-law, who I watched that movie with. I like to try to bring her into my reviews as much as I can.
Is it in?
And yes, Not Us
the Reflection.
Yeah, Bleeding Skull Video. They partnered with Mondo, and the first release on VHS will be Cards of Death, which I have not seen.
Wait, they're releasing them to VHS?
They're on VHS,
not DVD.
As far as I know, it's just you. As far as I know, it's just VHS. I would recommend checking the site or Mondo to make sure. But I believe it's just VHS for the moment.
Now, are they doing these as like the exclusive VHSs, like they did with VHS or Beyond the Black Rainbow, where they cost like $75 a piece?
I don't
or
believe
are these
so.
like affordable VHSs?
These are affordable. If
they're selling them, then I feel like it's a mass-produced thing.
And they're having at the Cine Family on the 21st at 10 p.m. They will be showing Cards of Death, which I'm excited about. As I said, I haven't seen it, and the director will be there.
Oh.
So it should be.
Now, do they
pretty
project
exciting.
on VHS with a film like that, or
I don't know how they'll be doing it. Whether it comes from I know it's shot on video.
It won't be a print, but maybe there's a Blu-ray.
I don't know exactly. It's
like,
exciting.
What would a Blu-ray of a VHS even be?
We don't need that. We
wouldn't.
We're trying to figure out how to do VHS screenings.
Yeah, we're going to try to do some VHS. And maybe do something from this book.
We have, because we did show at Cine Family. We did show Black Devil Doll from Hell and Quaddead, and those those were
from the DVD. Yeah, they got a
DVDs. Yeah. But when we showed Night to Dismember,
you showed Night to Dismember.
We had Doris Wishman's actual VHS copy that she designed herself, and when she was trying to sell it to video companies that she would take to video companies.
I have one of them.
Oh wow!
I do. Well, I have a portion of a book that I wrote on Doris Wishman.
I love Doris.
Yeah, she's kind of one of my favorite people.
I confess that I own that DVD and I haven't watched it yet. What? It's way out of print.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
yes.
it's one of the jewels in my collection.
No,
Night to
I
Dismember
have
is
Night to Dismember, and I have most of her stuff. And the last one, the last one that she shot before she died. I don't even remember.
I know there was
a guy in Florida. We were going to show it at Jump Cut at one point. Remember, Jose knew this cinematographer.
He gave me a copy of it.
Okay, yeah.
He said it's a little slow.
Good. Yeah, he said it was
but it's Doris, so I love it, and I love that I have like the last film she ever made, and a few other people have it, and it's phenomenal for that. But
I recommend Night to Dismember heartily. It is 72 minutes of wow. It's a start,
and that's a good time period for me. I was talking about looking at the time on the back of a box, and I'm like, all right.
I highly recommend doing like a Doris travel where you start out with like her nudie cuties and then go to the roughies and then go to Deadly Weapons where it's about a woman killing people with her boobs, and then you can move on. But you really should get her like crazy shock film in there. God, Make Me a Woman. I can't remember.
Let Me Die a Woman.
Yeah,
that's a great New Zealand band do a song called that, and it's one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, I was curious about it because that used to always pop up in the cult section.
Yeah,
I'm like, what the hell is this?
It's got transsexual surgery in it.
It's interesting,
it was definitely like a shock film, but
it's interesting that it's like alternately extremely exploitive, but in some respects not completely exploitive. It's
showing you something that you wouldn't have been able to see otherwise.
Because you kind of watch it and it's just an odd film to watch.
Almost giving respect to them at the same time it's exploiting them.
Yes. I don't know if I want to see that though.
It's kind of weird.
I want everyone to know that while those three talked for the last 45 seconds, I did nothing but stare at a picture of a guy biting off a woman's nipple while staring at her pearl necklace.
Oh, that's Burial Ground.
Well, what I was going to say is that this is also cool because so when you're thinking about getting this book, it isn't all movies that me and Rob have never heard of. There's movies also peppered in, like Burial Ground, and one of my favorites, and I was pushing really hard to see if like Severin at one point would be able to find this and release it, The Mutilator, which is
The Mutilator.
I always thought it was a lot of fun, and it's it kind of like Final Exam where the tone's a little flat, but then there's some kills in it that are
really gory
and a great cover. But it's some of these ones. I think with that one,
We're
it was like really
on
hard.
a fall break.
Yeah, that's right. But some of them are really hard to track down the rights. That was one of those ones where the rights were like, it was like almost impossible.
Yeah, I'm sure that people have tried.
Yeah, it's
like
but it's cool. So there's a lot of films in here that
people
you will have heard of, as well as a lot of stuff that you've never.
I saw Scarecrows as well. Which
I
love that one.
I would say I love Scarecrows,
which is a nice mix. Rather than I think you guys would have gone wrong if you'd done Friday 13th. There's a dime a dozen now.
I always think like if people ask, like my mother said, would I know any of the films in here? And I say, well, Humongous, because that's Humongous is the most. The best known film I can think of.
A very iconic box cover.
And my mom loves it.
Really?
No, not really. my dad probably does. He's very into strange horror films. But
is that where you think you got where it started, where it begins?
I just loved horror films for as long as I can remember. I starting with the Universal monsters and such, and then a lot of the big insecty sci-fi films, and then growing up, sort of becoming like 7, 8, or 9 as the 80s began and slashers began. I couldn't watch. I was too scared to watch slashers until I was like 13 or 14, and I was scared of the dark. I was scared. I couldn't watch the preview for Friday the 13th. Had me. I had all the lights on. I had night lights. I had stuffed animals that I would put around the edge of my bed, just if something grabbed. Hopefully, it would grab one of the animals, and I could run. And and
I think that's a sound. Sound.
Yeah.
and finally, I had to, because I really wanted to watch these films. So I had to sort of. Remember one day I think I was 13. I was in the house by myself. Everyone was gone. It was late at night. I turned out all the lights. And I went into the basement, into a cedar closet where it was pitch black, and I just sat there in the dark until I wasn't scared anymore. And after that point, I was fine, and I could watch horror movies, and it was great. But until that point, until I was like 13 or 14, I was just.
So you're kind of like the Rolling Thunder of film video watchers. You had to like accept the torture and the punishment and go, all right, I'm ready for this now.
I just sat there until I was like, okay, I think I can move around in this now, and I was good after that point. I was good. So.
That's really funny.
Before we wrap up, we should talk briefly about, we were touching on just the history of direct-to-video movies and cinemas. I mean, we've been talking a lot about shot-on-video stuff, but just in general, it's been interesting to watch the evolution of direct-to-video, because it used to be, it was almost like I want to say almost like a dirty word to say it was a direct-to-video movie for a lot of studios. But there was a shift at some point. And, I remember, to me, the epitome of direct-to-video is Full Moon. I mean, that's the way that
of course.
Almost all those movies. I don't remember. Ghoulies was a theatrical feature, but I don't remember that. I remember discovering all the Full Moon titles on video, and that was the way they came out.
Subspecies.
And they used to,
Seeing the ads for them and getting excited that it was going to be at my local video store as opposed to a theater. And
and often because we couldn't get into the theaters for these
exactly.
movies.
Yeah.
We're at an age where we could get them on
try.
VHS, but we couldn't get it, and that's a big deal. I think that's a big part of it. You know?
Yeah, because then you get, I would sneak in or ask somebody, but I had like a punk rock dude that just rented me anything. So I knew no matter what, I was going to get my hands on that video, even if I wasn't old enough. But yeah, for me, my earliest memories are definitely Full Moon stuff. And I was thinking about it on the way here. I'm pretty sure that's the way I discovered Stuart Gordon, because I don't really remember Reanimator. I remember Pin the Pendulum, the Full Moon one, Castle Freak. And I think that's the first time I realized who he was. And I mean, those were all, movies that didn't play theatrically that I discovered on video. And then, it was interesting seeing studios get in on that in terms of continuing franchises.
Yes,
like all of a sudden there's all these Amityville sequels, Howling sequels,
the Silent Night, Deadly Night films. I remember going crazy. Yeah.
Critters,
I mean,
even,
Are there any
something
many of these films that spawn sequel? I know we talked about Blood Cult. But
The sequel to Blood Cult is in there. Slumber Party Massacre 1, 2, and 3. I think is in there.
3's kind of neutered.
Yeah, but
were 2 and 3 of that franchise direct to video, or because the first one,
I want to
Slumber Party played theatrically, right?
Yeah, 3. They look like they are.
Yeah.
They have that sort of softness to
But
them.
2
that
was,
the late
2 was
80s
shot on film, and it looks interesting. It's very Florida looking. I always think 2 is the Florida pastel. 3's not. 3 just as flat. Yeah. It's interesting, but I was curious more like these kind of movies, like these movies that are just like some guy shot on video. Is there anyone out there who's made like part 1, part 2, like 8-part series of video
their
shot
own franchise
craziness, or that no one's like a franchise no one knows about? Is what I
can
guess.
say that those are going on now.
Yeah.
It's like I'll get
probably,
press releases where it's like Aliens versus Ninjas Part 5, and then I look and I'm like, they've made 4 others of these, and I don't know how they keep going.
Sometimes that's like a gimmick though, and you have to double check and make sure.
Leonard Part 6.
I was so baffled by that.
That caused me a lot of pain in my life.
Surf 2 and The Executioner Part 2.
Oh, The Executioner, yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
So I don't know. Anybody have any favorite direct-to-video stuff that's not necessarily anything that we talked about so far?
I'm always intrigued by the current direct-to-video stuff because, like, Trick or Treat was technically
technically.
direct-to-video. And even still, like, a lot of my favorite movies that I look back over the last 10 years, like May or The Children, they're all technically direct-to-video.
Yeah.
But
Does that
now-
include, like, festivals?
That was
play
my
at the
big
theater,
question. Like, do we include festivals? And also now, do we include VOD? Because VOD kind of throws a weird cog in the wheel because most things go VOD now.
Which is almost the equivalent of that's what I was saying is like, it used to be a dirty word to be like, oh, they must suck if, when From Dusk Till Dawn is successful and then they're like, well, we're making a 2 and 3, but they're direct to video. And then you're like, oh, those aren't going to be that good. And then all of a sudden there was a little shift where it's like, you know what? They're putting some money into this particular sequel or this thing.
Maybe when Disney started doing it all the time.
Disney could have been the one that made it
Little Mermaid 2, Tinkerbell 2,
or at least a business where people are like, well, if Disney's sequelizing all their stuff, we could do it too.
You can do it for kids, so why not?
So, but yeah, VOD feels to me like, it's weird because some of those films play theatrically a month later or whatever the case is. But I feel like VOD is like this. It's this weird hybrid of what modern day direct to video is, but at the same time, it's like it replaced the indie theater. There's not that many indie theaters where you can go and see these weird.
It's such a case by case basis because some movies are totally fine to be seen like that. Like Paranormal Activity 2, I saw on video, and I remember thinking it felt like it was more effective. Like what you were saying about Oculus, it felt very effective that way. But if I'd seen it in theater, I wouldn't have been affected by it because I was alone in a house and it creeped me out. And it's about watching video cameras. So if then in a theater, I'd be like, I don't want to watch video cameras And so I think some of these smaller movies, but other movies, like I want a group of people. If it's a comedy, I want to see what people.
Definitely.
And I think that's part of the VOD is kind of this bad blanket that's just going to be thrown over all movies. Where really maybe it should be like cherry picked. Like to me, the one I would say is The Sacrament. Even though I saw it theatrically, I remember thinking about that after when I walked out going, you know what? That film might be even more effective
Right.
as a one-on-one movie.
Yeah,
it's just you and the movie.
That's how I'd prefer to watch it.
Yeah, I think that'd be creepy. I think it would have a more of an effect rather than an audience taking it in.
Yeah.
I tend to shriek a lot during movies like that, so I like to be by myself. So.
But it is a question. I think it's up to the filmmaker. Unfortunately, it's probably usually out of their hands. It gets taken out of their hands by distributors to make some money back.
VOD, I posted up an article on this a couple of days ago that was pretty fascinating, how VOD is a completely different animal, because even when there's always been a transparency in the industry. We know how much a movie made theatrically. We know how many tickets
marketing
it sold.
stuff is always bullshit.
Marketing stuff's kind
everything.
of weird because they don't include that in their tallies. You know how much the P&A budget.
They can say whatever they want.
But and even when we had VHS sales, it was always how many units have you moved at home, and these were all transparent figures. VOD is not transparent. We have no idea how movies are performing on VOD. And like in the article, it mentioned ABCs of Death. Everyone thought this movie had done horribly because it did bad at box office and it didn't move that many DVDs, but they've already booked to number 2. And when they were questioned about it, they were like, oh, well, it did great on VOD. Well, nobody knows this because there's no transparency. Like Amazon, Hulu, no one reports numbers.
So you could just say your film did.
Yeah. So it's kind of, there's actually a journalist here in Los Angeles who is doing a campaign to fight for transparency so that iTunes and Amazon would have to report their numbers because it does give some type of guidance of which way the industry is headed. Whereas now with VOD, we have none.
Yeah.
So kind of weird.
It's a
weird.
Wild West again. We're back to a Wild West of distribution. It's interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, sir? Please explain yourself. Why did you do VOD? A different kind of guest.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm ready for Cards of Death.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Did you guys watch the trailer? It looks like all neon,
yet.
but yet it's kind of got that washed out VHS look, and there's a really big sweaty guy who wears a mask.
Yeah, it's if Joe and Zach recommend it, it's going to be a good time.
Should we a couple final quick fire? What's the craziest thing you ever saw?
For what?
Could even be a moment in a movie. Did you see anything, or are you just like, what the hell did I just see? Any of those kind of moments, or a movie that you feel like if somebody needs to see this one movie premiere, one recommendation from you, from your heart to the audience's ears.
I was going to
pressure.
say some of the two of my I asked my wife what she thought my favorites might be, and I think
that's awesome
because I was a little unsure.
Yeah,
and I would either go with Don't Go in the Woods or The Last Slumber Party.
See, I haven't seen that one. Last Slumber Party.
Don't Go in the Woods.
Don't Go in the Woods is wonderful because
that's a good release.
You can. I watched it for years, not having any idea exactly what it was. I would watch it and kind of think, is this serious? What's going on? Is it? And then a few years ago, I saw it at the New Beverly with a big crowd, and it was one of their grindhouse nights, and they showed The Forest before it, and everyone was laughing at the forest and just making fun of the forest. But then they showed Don't Go in the Woods, and after about 2 minutes, I realized that the audience was not laughing at it. They were laughing with Don't Go in the Woods. And the director was there, and he said, oh, yeah, that's my sense of humor, what you're seeing up on the screen. So it's one of those movies where I watched for a decade thinking, this movie, it's actually one of Scott Reynolds. It was the first, when Scott and I first met back in late 1995, we used to do movie night, and the first 3 movie nights we did, Scott showed me The Wild Bunch, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, and another Peckinpah film, I forget which one, a war one. And I showed him Winter Beast, Frozen Scream, and Don't Go in the Woods.
Winter Beast, huh?
Winter Beast is awesome.
Iron Cross, was it?
Iron Cross. It was Iron Cross. Yes.
That's why I'm here.
Yes. Yes. But Don't Go in the Woods is one of those movies that's deceptive because you at least I thought it was because you watch it and you're laughing at it and you're thinking, boy, this might be the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And then when I saw it with the crowd, I realized, oh no, wait a minute. The director knew what he was doing, and he's literally, you could tell with the crowd, the film was almost always like 10 seconds ahead of the crowd. So it was like, and it was a really weird, I got out of it and I was like, wow, okay, he knew what he was doing.
Sometimes it's fun to see movies like that.
That's the one with the girl with the blonde hair and the sunglasses on and her head's like cocked.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I've seen it when I was a kid. I haven't seen it since I was probably 10 years old.
I would recommend if you can see it with a crowd. It's something. And Last Slumber Party is
calling all queer bags. School is out. Summer's here. Yeah. That's the opening line of The Last Slumber Party, not my actual opinion.
Wow.
Everyone, please know that.
You don't think summer's here?
Last Slumber Party is one that it's just one of those films where in every scene something sort of violates every rule of cinema in one way or another. You know, just something goes wrong. Whether it's the sound editing, whether it's everything going out of focus, whether it's jumping from like one shot where it's like it looks like it's on video to the next shot where it's clearly like 8mm film to even scenes where like the characters are walking towards the camera and we're tracking back with them, and you could see that people are forgetting lines and the other actors are kind of prompting them to their lines, and there are all these extras walking all around them, but about halfway through the scene the extras are all gone and the scene is still going on, so it's like someone
and cue extras.
Yeah, someone screwed up. But yeah, Last Slumber Party is just one of those that it's just almost every scene has a moment in it where you watch
is hard
it
to
and go,
explain.
And there's also a strange temporal disconnect with Last Slumber Party 2 in that it's dated 1988, but I think quite a bit of it from some evidence in the film was shot earlier in the decade and finished later.
I'm feeling a Killer POV screening.
Yeah, I'm thinking a double feature with Bleeding Skull is in order for.
Wow.
We'll pick a
That'd be
couple
fantastic.
VHS quality ones and throw it down.
What does your wife think of all this stuff? Does she watch any of these movies?
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you have kids?
No. We don't have kids. 2 dogs and a cat. But my beautiful wife is she watches a lot of these with me. She's watched Last Slumber Party with me and Don't Go in the Woods. Sometimes she'll watch them sort of drift off, and when she's in the mood to watch them, we have a great time.
Right.
And it's wonderful. If she's not in the mood and I can kind of tell, we will watch something else,
right.
and then I will watch it if she drifts off to sleep or something.
Does
like
it
that.
affect how you watch? Because I always wondered that with like Brian Collins, where he had to watch a horror movie a day, but then he was really into comedy. Him as a person, he's really into comedy. Does it affect what you watch? Especially going all in on a book where you have to do a lot. You guys did a lot of work, obviously. Does it affect what else you watch or the quality of how you watch other movies? Like, say, when you then see a big $4 million big budget horror film, or like The Conjuring. If you see a movie like that, do you now have a different relationship to that because you've watched so much of this kind of stuff?
I don't think so. My wife we just recently watched The Conjuring, and I really liked it.
Yeah, it's good.
And it's a lot of these films, like films in the book and films on Bleeding Skull, are sort of special films, and they're in a weird place in my mind. Kind of, I've been watching them for so long that they're not like regular films. Like when folks ask me, "What are your favorite films?" I'll tell them I'll have to give 2 lists. One will be the Bleeding Skull list with Don't Go in the Woods and Blood Lake and Carnival of Blood and stuff like that, and then one will be the list with the regular movies like what do I like Duck Soup and Brewster McCloud and the Back to the Future trilogy and stuff like that.
Now,
So
do you have breaking points? Because I think we all 3 do, where it's like we've watched nothing but horror. Fuck it, I'm going to watch like Anchorman 2 just because it's not.
yeah, they're hits. I'm actually working on a new book right now, which is 80s based but not horror based, where I'm watching a lot of very similar types of films where
Wildlife.
I have the stuff. Mainly wildlife. Yeah, it's.
I own that if you need it.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
It's awful, but we
you
own
mean
it.
non-horror 80s films that are lesser seen?
Another genre from the 80s.
Wildlife is the sequel to Fast Times at
Fast Times at
Ridgemont
Ridgemont High, yeah.
that no one ever saw,
yeah,
and
I
it's
haven't
got
seen
Spicoli's brother in it, and
Is Bob
smokes.
Bob? What's his name? The guy who's the guy who works at the movie theater.
no
guy
one from
we've
the
got
original
hooked up
cast
with.
is in it.
I think I saw it on HBO. I snuck in a viewing late one night when no one was around.
One of those films that we were talking about last week where you see it as a kid and you think it's amazing and then you go back and watch it. And so both Dave and I had really fond memories of the wildlife, and then we bought it and it cost a lot because it's like really hard to find. And then we paid like $50 for the VCR tape and it shows up and we were like, man, this is awful. But we still have it. It's brilliant.
Alrighty, well, the book is Bleeding Skull, in 1980s Trash-Horror Odyssey, and of course the website.
The
Bleeding
website
Skull.
will get you worked up to want the book, I think.
Oh
It did
my
for me.
gosh,
I've been looking at it for the last few days, and it's kind of exciting, even just seeing an image. Actually, they also have these cool, like, 30-second trailers that you guys were doing, which is just like a clip from all these different movies, and that was almost enough for me to sell me on it.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, we had for the book, we did about a half a dozen sort of trailers from picking obscure movies, and it's great because you put them on YouTube, and instantly, you'll get someone saying, "Oh, what movie is that?" And then you can hear the guy's voice like, "That's Heavy Metal Massacre made by." And you can hear, but it's great because there's one on there that's just 30 seconds of two guys in the woods beating up another guy.
Oh yeah, I saw
and
that.
no one has
disturbing.
Identified what movie it is.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm not going to tell you.
I like the one "Shut Up and Eat Your Breakfast." Where she just shut up and eat your breakfast, and you're like, "Oh, okay."
That's Andy Milligan Carnage.
Okay.
Oh, wow. We may have, because I can't say yet, we may have just contracted a FEARnet writer to do a very large piece for Fangoria on Andy Milligan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Andy Milligan's is
There's a good
great.
documentary on him.
And a great book, too.
Yeah, I can't remember what the name of that was, but it was good. It was like 2 years ago. Interesting. Anyway, so this will probably be the episode where you really need a list.
Yes.
Because you probably haven't heard of any of these
I don't
films.
know half the
I
shit
don't
we
either. I'm
talked
gonna have
about
to
tonight.
write half of these down.
Yeah, I got to say, like, most of the fans leave with a list. I have 3 pages of notes from this episode where I circled things like the jar, the power, Kunhi Matata, Manda, Satan's bed. Yeah.
And
Satan's bed, there's no information online. So I almost wonder if the title's wrong because I looked it up and I couldn't find that title anywhere.
Sometimes, these films will just have sort of random, like random titles.
We're reaching out to you, audience. If anyone out there has Satan's bed,
I want to screen that.
I want all those Nightmare ripoffs.
The one thing I will say, and we used to say this before the Bleeding Skull shows, and I know Joe, who hosts Terror Tuesday at the Alamo Draft House, he will say this too. He will warn folks that some of these films are kind of dull. There are going to be dull stretches like I love Boarding House, but it's
a little dry.
You need to have some sort of focus when you go into some of these films because they are going to Dr. Bloodbath, for example, which we showed at a couple of which is basically about an abortion doctor who kills women, and so much of the movie is him going out to his car, opening the back door, putting his medical bag in the back, closing the door, getting in the front seat, and pulling away. That happens about 6 times in the movie, and the movie's only an hour long.
Wow.
Well, and I think a modern version of that is Birdemic, and I think we've talked about it before, but that first one was made by someone who just thought they're making a good movie. Yeah. And there's a lot of car shots, a lot of getting in your car, backing up.
Well, in the second one, there's like a 20-minute walking through Hollywood scene, most of it done from afar, like across the street. Watching him walk the entire distance of the frame, it's pretty painful.
It is. Wow. That is pretty painful.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I would say though, if you want to, I just thought the ultimate, and if you can make it through Night of Horror, and not want to come to my house and punch me or throw my dog around the room, don't do it.
All right, we're having a Night of Horror challenge.
Night of Horror challenge. If you can make it all the way through Night of Horror and find something of worth in it, and I have. Then you're good to watch like 90% of the film.
Do you own it?
On here. I do. I have a VHS of Night of Horror. Right, Genesis home video.
I'll talk to Reynolds. We're gonna do a screening.
That was that might be. I don't know. It's
I don't know if I want to show the most boring one. I think I want to see the most exciting.
It's very audaciously boring. Like you sit there and you're like, wow, you're still doing this. Wow. And the guy who made it followed up with a film called Curse of the Screaming Dead, which is very similar. But has a lot of gore in like the last 20 minutes. So whereas Night of Horror, Night of Horror does not, and is almost a dare of a film.
Amazing.
Wow.
I've never had this many things to have to look up.
I know. We got a lot of work to do now.
Enjoy
next week.
What you find.
Oh yeah, no, we'll have fun, and hopefully after this we'll hash out something, and we could actually screen a couple of these.
Oh, that would be great.
A couple of the ones we can't even find ourselves, so we have a reason to look at it. You know, it'll be fun.
Cool.
Yeah, and one more thing that just occurred to me. The tricky things with some of the shot on videos is, and I think this happened with Last Slumber Party when they showed it. They do that Cinefamily thing where they show like the first 5-10 minutes of a movie, and they showed Last Slumber Party one year, and it started off great, but then it bombed, and I think part of showing these films to large crowds is so many of these, like Last Slumber Party, were made to be watched on a TV in your living room. That like the sound in Last Slumber Party, when there's just an opening sequence that I mentioned earlier, it's the 3 leads walking towards the camera for like 3 minutes and talking. And even watching it by yourself in a room, some of the sound isn't the best. And it's
Muffled,
kind of mumbled and garbled, and you can't
yeah.
always hear. After about 3 or 4 viewings, I know exactly what they say, and it's awesome. But it is one of those things where some of these films aren't meant to be watched with a large group of people, because you're going to lose. Well, it's the sound mainly is what it is.
We'll do a test. We're going to do a test anyway. That's a good warning. And sometimes also blowing up things that don't look good just look like they're almost abstract when you blow them up.
Yes,
you know?
they go. Yeah, they go.
So, there's a company called Horror Remix who I absolutely love them. They do a lot of work with the Alamo Drafthouse, and it's actually the first way that I saw the Christmas movie that you like so
Christmas
much.
Evil.
Christmas Evil is
awesome.
the first way. It's the first way I saw Iced, which was in the book.
Oh, I love Iced.
But what they do is they will take these old, like really hard to find horror films. They'll cut out all of the 20-minute driving sequences and things like that. So they make them like a brisk, like half an hour to 40 minutes long, and then they level the audio.
Oh, wow.
And then they screen them at the Alamo Drafthouse, and they'll usually screen like 3 at a time. And they'll make sure that they have themed, like I saw the Christmas one, and they have a drug one and a rock and roll one, and they're
But there's nothing you could cut out of Christmas Evil, because that movie's already like a perfect movie.
That sounds amazing, actually.
Yeah,
Lewis,
really,
if you're listening,
if you guys would like to
before they get
screen one
you.
of those at Jump Cut, I think we could probably finagle it. They're good guys. They're really
Well, you
good
could
guys.
definitely do. You could do a 12-minute cut of Blood Cult.
You could.
I would
can
watch
do
the
it
12-minute
You could
version.
basically, maybe include the final scene and the scene where he attacks the gal with the head of the other gal.
I just remember being thrown when the old guy suddenly was like the lead for a while. There's like this really old guy, and you're like, this is really boring right now.
That's one of the things about these two is you never just sit there
it's
and
not
go,
movie stars.
This old man is now the
Well, and to think about like movies, Hollywood cinema basically works on this idea of like identification, where we identify with George Clooney. It's like you watch these movies, you're like, I don't even know what part of the screen to look at.
What world is this?
They all look the same.
That does happen,
and it's not good.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's great. Well, thanks so much for coming. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling Killer POV and Bleeding Skull are going to do something crazy.
Yeah, we're going to
That would be fantastic.
The wheels are turning.
making something amazing together.
So don't forget, speaking of Crazy 80s, Death Spa this weekend, if you can make it.
Oh, Death Spa is wonderful. Yeah,
I've never
Shout
seen it.
it,
So
Jump
for
Cut
free.
this weekend.
it's going to be
come
fun
on
to check
down.
out.
Sponsored by Fangoria.
Yep.
Awesome.
So fingers crossed it'll be fun.
Yeah.
Ken Foray is not coming.
I have some crazy prizes to give out too. I got
Nice.
some really cool stuff at Phoenix Comic Con.
Oh, cool.
The Dark
right.
Horse people brought me stacks of stuff, so I've got some
cool.
really cool shit this weekend.
Incentive to come to Death Spa.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes, exactly.
And then thank you to Dan for coming in.
Oh, yes.
And
Thank
Bleeding
you.
Skull. Thanks
Had
to
a good
Scott
time,
Reynolds
yeah.
for setting it all
Yeah,
up.
look
you,
out for
Scott.
Cards of Death.
Oh,
That's
yes,
release.
yes.
Cinema
Next
Family, June 21st.
21st at 10 p.m. Come on down. It's going to
Yep.
be great. And they'll have copies of the VHS for sale, too. So
Beautiful.
it'll be
Believe
awesome.
it. Was that a weekend?
It
It's,
is
Saturday.
Saturday.
Cool.
Yeah.
Gotta try to get it.
All right. And next week, Mark Gallblatt.
Mark Gallblatt will be we're all very excited.
Look him up on my IMDb and you will see why we're so excited.
But we will end with saying just the words Dead Heat.
Oh,
I would have said Terminator, but Dead Heat. Okay.
Okay. Goodbye.
Punisher.
Punisher. Goodbye.
excellent.
Goodbye, people.